That was perfect. I felt like this water was just going to keep going. So I did the quick switch, and just as I switched, it stopped. That was like magic right there. Power by itself.
Okay, so how do I fill this form out? I never did this. Ben always did this.
I was thinking I'd filled mine out correctly.
Yeah,
I feel like
it's really just that top part.
Yeah, it was like
Some
little
stuff
stickers
on there.
and letters.
Yep.
So I don't have to go on anything here. No. An exemption code or anything.
Mhm.
Original. Our twins today. We should have done the two.
We did win. Mine.
Where you should have.
Is it bad? Trish already knows it. Why am I not touching it?
Well, either one.
So right now, right here, I still have a flashlight.
I did take the flashlights to the school yesterday because I thought about doing flashlights Friday.
But there's not enough.
But I didn't realize the batteries weren't in them, so I didn't have the
Oh,
time.
but
Oh,
I
yeah.
know, because I have mine in for the same reason, the new battery.
They have batteries, they're in the bag.
Okay,
I have to put them in the flashlight.
I'm gonna actually do it.
I did the flashlight lesson with my nieces. It was really cute.
oh, cool.
Moon's always supposed to be capitalized.
Huh?
Moon always supposed to be capitalized.
I think they just have it on these things that it's like, it's the title of things.
Look in the text, is moon capitalized in the
Yeah.
text?
It is.
I guess so, it's the name of a planet, it's a proper noun, right?
Okay.
I guess so.
Gotten that wrong, I lied.
You know what, I know, because it doesn't like, you don't usually see a capitalized on it.
We'll get a cow bar for you. There it is.
We'll try it just this.
Okay, some sugars. Oh, I think. You know, I'm pretty impressed by your Diet Coke.
Oh, I don't do coffee, so they
I don't either, yeah.
That's what I got.
I actually read an apple makes you up better than coffee. That's your way to go.
I actually find the cold drink is smart.
I don't know. The only time I ended up drinking soda was when I was down in the hospital with my husband, because it was really the only option I had. And I hadn't drank soda for 2 years. And I gave it up, and I'll tell you, I felt really bad after I gave it up.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I used to be a Diet Coke all the time.
I died Pepsi. So I don't know, is that everything you need on there?
I think so.
That my husband always used to fill it in. So. Okay. And I have some drama at home, so if I happen to get up and leave, that would be the only reason why.
Brian, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. I don't think anyone else is coming until Allison's coming later. That sound right?
And I don't know about Teresa or Linda. I'm hoping that they'll pop in at some point. The important thing is that all of you are here, or there.
Yes, that's true. That is.
are you all doing?
How are you doing?
Doing all right.
So loaded question for me.
How are you guys dealing with the snow days?
It was a long week.
Yeah.
It really was.
2
days off, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is.
You are alive.
Not consistent.
Great,
Oh, even California's getting the snow this week.
Right.
huh?
great.
It's all that so weird.
My family lives in Southern California, along the beach in Dana Point area, and they got snow yesterday.
Arizona got it.
Easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Las Vegas.
Vegas
Vegas
is snowed
is
in.
crazy. I had feeling abundant.
We have a house in Flagstaff, Arizona, and they got, in 24 hours, they got 3 seconds.
Oh my God.
The Flagstaff is on my list of the top 10 worst places I would live if I could have a chance.
It's beautiful. That's so true, but I'm glad I'm not there right now. Wow, all right. Let's see. So I have sort of a loose agenda, but I thought I'd start with, if you guys have any questions or anything that came up from last time.
We had a really difficult time
Okay.
communicating. Never at school did I see you.
Really?
I mean, I took a picture of it from my bed the other morning, because out of my window I could see it. And it was at like a 45, so I knew and I was at 5:30 in the morning, and I knew by the time I drove to work, it was letting people know the horizon. So, and I live in Westchester, and I drive to Cookville, but with all the cloud cover,
Yeah.
we have never been able to locate it.
Terrible.
Yeah, it's, we're just gonna have to suffer through the weather. One of the things that I was working on that we'll get to when we're on the planetarium was, we talked last time about, when we want to go out and try to see it in school, have them do their observations, and you basically have 2 choices. You can do it in the morning or in the afternoon, but depending on what you pick, you have to start at a different time in the lunar cycle. And I know Teresa, who was one of our San Francisco folks, said, well, you could do just like breakfast moon, and so start it in the morning. But part of that depends on when you guys are able to actually get outside. If it's easier to do it in the morning or in the afternoon. So, like, or you said you saw it in the morning, so by the time you got to school, that particular moon would have set, but the next day would have been a little higher in the sky at the same time. Right, but I don't know what works best for your schedule.
I mean, you and I can go out first thing in the morning.
First thing in the morning or sometime in the afternoon. I'm good either way. I can schedule.
Yeah, we can be flexible with
Yeah. You make
a
it work.
little bit.
All right, so we can talk more about that when we get to the planet. I'm gonna have to go back in the planetarium. I put a little more formal structure stuff together so we can look at it. But I have it set up, so assuming that we're observing in the morning. Well, like I said, it's gonna depend on weather. I mean, and I don't think we probably don't wanna say, well, we'll try, and then if it doesn't work, we'll move to the afternoon, because that shifts the whole, and you kind of have to lock into a time of day.
Right.
And then that'll determine when you come to the planetarium. And so, if you go out for 3 days and it's just cloudy, then we'll do our observations in the planetarium.
Okay.
I mean, we could ask the kids, well, you could look at home, but that's, again, going to be a totally different day. So that changes. Any other things that came up that you wanted to revisit or? I just figured we'd start in case there were questions or anything you wanted to talk about from last time. All right. So the next thing I wanted to show you, well, I guess Brian can show you because he's on the big screen, but Brian, I was going to show them the shared Google Drive.
Oh, yeah, go for it. And I give you management privileges over that so you can add people to it and all that.
So we, as a research team, we have, since we're in San Francisco and here, and we have some people who are in Ohio and all over the place. So we have a Google Drive, and what we decided to do is make a folder that was just specifically for this part of the team. And that way, any documents that we want to share, we just put in there. And especially when it comes to developing things to use in the classroom, everybody shouldn't have to redo the same thing. So we can just all have one place. And Brian, I'm gonna, you know what? I've never done the sharing my screen.
Well, there you go.
Interesting.
So if I'm like now.
Oh, you know what? I need to, there we go. All right.
So, I need to go to Google.
And we will need to add them. We'll have to.
Right.
And so hopefully they'll have either a Gmail address or something that they can associate with a Gmail account.
Yeah, I don't know. We weren't sure if your Coatesville Area School District emails would allow you to go to, to be shared to a Google Drive. Okay. So if you want, I can just add those to school emails. Right. So I'll do that later today, but you'll get an invitation.
But it's just this grade 3 team folder. So you won't actually see the other ones because you're not in those. But so far there are a few documents in here. And so one of the things that we put in here is this folder of culturally relevant pedagogy, because we'll talk about that later today. But these are articles. They're pretty intense. These are education articles. But I was just scanning them, and I noticed that the one that's the 12 and the 10 one here both deal with kids actually journaling. Now, in one case, they are making observations. In the other case, it's more of a journal. But one is like a science experiment about earthworms. So they observe earthworms, they journal in their journal. So I thought those two were kind of the most relevant, but it's specifically dealing with minorities and things like that, different cultures. So even I was looking through them going, wow, this is a lot of lingo that I don't understand. But the 10 and 12 ones are probably the most relevant to what we're doing. Want to look at those, but today we're going to.
And then kind of going along with that, one of the authors on all of those, Verilas, Maria Verilas, she's actually one of the advisors on this project. And so we're hoping to put together about a 1 hour virtual meeting over this the Zoom for everyone, and we'd have all of you there for that. We'd also have all of the first grade teachers from here participate in that. And so we haven't figured out a time for that. But that's something that we're hoping to have here, sometime in the next month or so. So you actually get a chance to meet her and hear from her. She's really pretty great. She's at, I think, the University of Chicago, something like that.
Yep. Hold on, Brian, I'm just trying to make sure that you can see this again. I had to move my screen. All right. So. All right. Just leave it that way. Okay. So yeah, we can, as we said in the original kind of flyer for this, we would have 2 in-person meetings, and we might have some occasional virtual meetings, and maybe at home or whatever. We'll just log in this way. And Maria can chat with us about different ways of what might work best for the different activities we're doing, as trying to make it culturally relevant. All right, so you'll get an invitation, and feel free to upload stuff. I know last time in our conversation, you guys kind of got excited about putting things in the right sequence and whatnot, which is awesome. We need to finalize that. So if you have notes that you want to put in there, and then we can all just kind of have one master document and add to it and put questions or comments. This is just one repository. I've got a couple other documents in there. I'll show them to you today, and then they live there. And if we want to edit them, we can edit them. All right. So let's see. I thought we would just go through kind of what we talked about last time as the initial sequence in the classroom. And then, like I said, I did a little more work in the planetarium. It's not final yet, but a little more work in the planetarium. So I can take you through that and kind of go through step by step. But I did edit the little probe. So this is basically that probe that we started with, where you drew a picture of, and then I just edited it so it's all on one page. It may or may not, be the best format for your kids. So this is one of the documents that's in that shared drive that we can play with this. We can decide if it needs to be separate pages for these things, or does it need to be reworded. But this was just the draw a picture, then think about how many words we need to see and explain why you think that.
I made one too.
Oh, did you? This is why I put that chair there, so we won't keep doing
Since she got here, by the way.
What's that?
Since she got here.
All right.
I just had some cute fun.
Absolutely. So, like I said, this is a Word doc in that folder. Yeah, you could just upload yours and fill it out. Like I said, I wasn't sure if you left it space or time or whatever. But I think what we were looking at was starting with this and then reading the story after this. So trying to get them to think what they've seen, talk about their drawings, compare, so-and-so's drawing looks different than this one. Are they something wrong with that? Do they have a different drawing? Why do they all look different? Maybe some people drew houses and not just the moon. Maybe some people drew some stuff on the moon and others are just empty. So a good discussion about all the different kinds of pictures. And then when do you see the moon? When do you think you can see it? How do you know that? Have you seen it before? Have you seen it in a book or a movie or something like that? So I think that's the first step. Brian, feel free to jump in if you got comments.
I will.
Okay. And if you guys remember something different or have a different suggestion, I don't mean to say so. This is where we need your expertise.
No, that's fantastic. And then we also talked about last time, doing the moon cards as a pre-assessment to see what they know.
Yeah. So later on, one of our researchers is going to talk in, I think last time Kristen was here, it was a two research team. Allison's going to come in. And that was actually questions that our astronomy team had for them. What kind of assessment do they need? And what do they need you guys to be noting things or anything like that? So she's going to come in probably at 11, and we can ask her stuff like that as well. If you all think that's a good thing to do, we can certainly do it. I just want to know from them, is that something that they need? We need to make notes on what we can do or record anything, or can we just do this for our own benefit, or maybe they can say we want to. I don't think that would be.
I definitely see the benefit of a pre-assessment for lots of reasons. Like, it certainly would help guide our instruction. And it would also help you guys to know how impactful the curriculum is.
Right. I know they'll have a pre-assessment. I just don't know what they're looking for in it.
Okay.
So, but I did get better images. Brian got me better images of them. These are really awesome compared to those. So I gave copies that everybody gets a set. This is not the master or anything like that, but we'll play with these later. So everybody gets an envelope. But yeah, you could have those, and that could be a good pre-assessment. I would probably say still do this first if you don't want to influence what they draw.
Right. Absolutely.
And
This can actually be a pre-assessment too.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely the when can you see the moon is a good pre-test. And then we read the book. And then after that, I wasn't sure. I know last time you all had talked about, obviously, if we're going to make observations and go out and notice the moon, we've got to do this on multiple, or at least try on multiple days. I wasn't sure how much of the probe here and the book and all of that, how much of that would be in one day of instruction for you all. Would you also on that same day try to go outside, or would that be the next day? Or how do you guys feel about all that? Is this a lot to do all at once?
Well, considering we're limited with time, I mean, I have 20 to 25 minutes of science allocated time at the very end of the day. So even taking the kids outside would have to be outside of that block. So I would see the moon probe as being one day, the book is possibly 1 or 2 days, and then moving into the observations.
All right. I have my own notes here. And then if we wanted to do the sorting the images as a second probe, you would then
That would be another
that would be
day.
a whole new day, right? Would you do that before or after, you think?
I would do the cards before.
Right, just to see what they know.
Yeah, we use it as a pretest.
So if we do the cards, that would be day 2, the break would be day 3.
Right,
If we don't do the cards, we'll do day 2. All right, and then after that, we'll try. Take one in the morning and make some observations. And I think it would be, I mean, it would be, everything, the planets align, no pun intended. It'd be great to have 3 days.
Oh, yeah.
Before we come into, I mean, the planetarium, we can do an entire month. Right there. But we would like to do a few at school.
I'd like to shoot for a week,
Yeah,
A week.
a week of observations.
I would agree.
I think we're gonna have to, just
Just in
like
case
in
of
the
the
days,
delay.
so much.
Sure.
days.
Sure. So that would be like 2, 10, something like that. Or 4 to 11, depending on when we start this. Okay, great. So I see that would be the whole pre-instruction or pre-visit instructional, all of that. Anything that you're seeing in there that needs to be tweaked, changed, added to? We need to clarify other than the pre-test. I'm going to make a list of questions for the researchers. All right. So the other one that we talked about, the other activity that we talked about, and I'm not sure we really decided on where it would go best, was the toad in the moon, where we talked about the pattern on the moon, not the pattern of the moon, different, but the pattern on the moon. And that was sort of a possible way to tie some cultural relevance in, because different cultures will have different stories. Not sure where that goes best. If it's something we want to do also before they come in. You could, if you do get lucky and you're able to observe the moon in the daytime, you could even talk about what they're seeing then, about does anybody actually draw the details on the moon? They shaded in, or they just draw in the shape. If somebody's actually noticing that, and there might be a whole topic of discussion, and look at the observations and talk about someone's different, why is it different. But there are those sort of short little stories. We can, when we get to meet with Maria, we might have some suggestions of other things in the class. But do you think that that's something that we want to throw in at the very beginning, or kind of add it in as we go?
Seeing them more as maybe a follow-up activity after we've done the drawing the room, discussing and doing the cards. If we do that as a pre-assessment story, it would be clear.
See, I kind of agree, because to me, if we're focusing on them actually seeing the shape of the moon, I don't know that I want to try to also tell them to look at the texture of the moon. I think, we focused on the shape, and then afterwards we can go back and say, okay, let's look at those cards you laid out. What do you notice about the way the moon looks? And then in the timings and stuff. I unfortunately, with our kids, the more we try to do and put into a lesson tends to sometimes distract them. So the simpler, the better. It's not like we don't want to do it, but let's do it in a manageable way for some of these children. Because sometimes they can't follow 3 directions at one time. So.
Would it make sense to wait until we get into the planetarium to try to do something more, now that they've done maybe observing at school, where they're just focused on the shape and the pattern that the shape is doing? And then if we go into the planetarium, you continue with the shape, but then add in.
I think that would be a great way to introduce it, because they might be able to see it more clearly than actually looking up in the sky.
But then, my concern is the amount of time that the planetarium visit will be. That with our kids, mapping it the way we plan on it, that might be the whole time period.
Okay.
But I can see using that as kind of a kickoff,
And then
or
we come
when we
back.
come back, we follow up on the backside.
Right.
So we wouldn't actually do Code of the Moon activity in the planetarium, but we would bring up the idea
use it,
on.
yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
And we can, well, I'll show you, in a minute. We can, if we want, really enlarge the moon and make it quite obvious patterns. Sometimes that can be a distractor, so, we want to kind of be careful to not go too far with that, but it certainly can be made much more obvious than real sky.
It'd be a great plan, see the plan for them.
Yeah,
as well.
Even if it's the very last thing that's done, and you're gonna talk more about this.
Right,
yeah.
The, that's one downside of observing the moon in the daytime, have the nice contrast. At night, the Maria just watches the show much better.
Mhm.
All right.
Can I ask you something about that idea?
Absolutely.
How much technology use should we use outside of, in our classrooms? Like, let's say we're looking at the patterns. Are you guys okay with us, going into the websites and finding that, especially obviously on the days when we can't see them?
Mhm.
But I know that it would impact the pattern of where it's placed. We've already discussed that in school, that we shouldn't like open up NASA site during that time period, the breakfast food part.
Mhm.
But what about for the patterns and stuff? Are you guys just really open to us using anything, or is it gonna be?
I don't see any reason not to. Do you, Brian?
Okay, so I was uploading a couple of things into the folder, and so what was the specific question?
If the teachers want during the pre or post, instruction or pre and post visit instruction, if there are questions or class discussions that could be augmented by looking up things on the web, pulling up, NASA images and things like that, is that a problem?
I don't know that it's a problem. I guess I always, I'm somewhat of a fan of minimizing the amount of digital interaction within the classroom. So.
But I mean, it would be different than say, looking up in the newspaper what the face of the moon was yesterday. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. I wouldn't do that. Even if you have pretty cloudy days, I'd say, well, that's how observations go. That's what happens when you do science, and we'll pick back up when it's not cloudy or so we'll fill in there. But yeah, I know older kids would be like, oh, we can just look on the internet. For the observation part, I wouldn't bother. But if someone had a question about what they saw, I think, pulling up what they saw, only now it's not their sketch, but it's an asset.
For the toad of the moon,
Yeah.
ideas, the patterns that you see there.
Yes.
I can see why that would be beneficial.
I will say, when you get the really high resolution images, sometimes it makes it hard. Because it's like, well, clearly that's not a bunny rabbit. That's, this is very detailed, splotchy, so I noticed that. Well, now it's like, well, now it looks like a plant. It doesn't really hard to do right at it. But yeah. Okay, good question. Okay, so we won't worry about the pattern unless, like I said, if somebody brings it up. That was one question I had for everybody, you included, Brian, is how much discussion of the observations do you want to talk about before you come to the planetarium? If you get a good couple of days in there and everybody's making their sketches, is it worth, as you're building up that data set, to stop and talk about, hey, let's look at what we've done for the last 3 days, what are we noticing? Or do we just want to collect the data, not try to do anything with it until we come to the planetarium and then collect more? Obviously, if it's completely cloudy the whole time, there's nothing to discuss. But, if you get a couple of days, kids might already notice things, you want to take the time to discuss what it is they're starting to see.
I put a couple of things, I put 2 things into the grade 3 team folder. For a different project I'm working on with a couple of other people here, updating some lunar things, and I think that they bear some usefulness here. They're very much in the draft form. One of them is a set of moon phase cards that features some of the different things that you can see during the different phases, because there's different features that are noticeable at different times. And so for, it's a little bit deeper dive into noticing features on the moon than perhaps what we're after but for you, it's better to have too much than not enough. So I put it in there just because it seemed like it was somewhat appropriate. We're also working on updating the Toad and the Moon a little bit, and so I put the current updated cards, so to speak, for the Toad and the Moon in there as well.
So how do you feel about discussing their observations in the classroom versus waiting?
I think it would probably just be happening. I mean, I don't know if that's like able to be avoided.
Right. I just didn't know if you wanted to have a very, structured discussion about it or just see what the kids.
I was thinking even if the kids go out and observe and they draw, we should still come in and have a classroom observation. So like after all the kids come back, then we can come in and put our classroom one up and we can say, okay, what did you see? What was yours like? Because let's face it, with 20 kids, you're going to get 20 different interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it would be best for us to come in and just say, okay, what did everybody see? Let's do this on our classroom one. That would be the only discussion I think we might have. Not why or anything else. There is, what did we see? So we have a classroom.
Right.
Yeah, I will say that I haven't worked with little kids doing this yet, but with the college students, when I show them stuff on the dome, there's a small but not insignificant fraction that will draw things backwards. It's like dyslexia for an image. And I asked the psychologists, and they never heard of anything, but the crescent moon, they will draw it the other way. And I'm like, so not what was up there, so it's weird. And so having everybody compare might be good because you may find that there's kids that are actually looking at it. I'll be curious to see if it happens. It happens in the planetarium with my students. And I don't know if they're just being lazy or what. But
we have fraction cards that we use, and I can honestly tell you that I can show two kids. I can show one of my students a 2/3 shaded in and a 4/6 shaded in, and ask them if it's the same, and they can't tell me because they cannot tell that the blue shaded in is the same on both cards.
Mm-hmm.
So if they can't look at those fraction cards, looking at the moon and shading it in could be a whole other thing.
And I have a student who, at this point, we are really questioning his flipping of everything.
okay.
So you even say that makes me go, this will be an interesting little
Right.
display, as we go forward with this, what's challenging.
Right.
So this might just help.
And spatial acknowledgement is very difficult too, because some kids, they don't see just a sliver, they might see the whole thing. So that'll be interesting to see what the spatial is.
Cool. So yeah, it sounds like having a classroom sort of agreement on what everybody draw. And not that we want everybody to conform,
No.
but if someone is flipping backwards, you can say, are you sure that's what they look like? And then, other things that hopefully will, if we get to do observations outside, that hopefully we'll come up with looking at the same time of day. It won't actually be in the same place in the sky. And again, some kids might be really tuned into that, and other kids might not. And that's something we want to notice between the differences. So and so, if you're way over here, and other people way over here, where really was it in the sky? And that's important. All right. So I think that was. I have notes of things to talk about the pre-sequence. All right, Brian, is there anything that you wanted to review about what we're doing before the planetarium visit?
No, I just think that it's that making sure that it's I guess engaging for the kids and gets them into the process of this, and it supports what's going to go on and later on, and what we do later on supports what you do at the beginning too. So just making sure it stays within kind of a coherent storyline.
We were just talking about the actual format of the journaling.
Yes. So I had this was my suggested format. This doesn't have to be, but the idea is that each one of these is a day where you can draw the horizon and where you're making this. I don't know, and this would be like where you put the date or the 1, day 2, whatever. I didn't know if this would work best if this is too small of a space, sometimes they don't get one or two a lot of space in it. So it may be that 4 on a page doesn't work, and they might want to have.
Yeah.
One of the ones that came with the activity that we handed out last time is it just has a calendar with circles. So in that case, you're just drawing a shape. Exactly. And we could do that. The one thing that which you can't record then is where is the fact that in this book you're noticing that it's disappearing too. It's no longer in the morning. And so they've drawn it this way in the book that it's getting closer and closer to the sun. But the journaling page like that doesn't allow for you to note that. So that's why I thought, where if they had a horizon where they can even draw the buildings, or it could be something that on the form, the buildings are already there. If we know, well, this is what they're going to see when they go outside. There's going to be that building and a tree. The basic outline of the horizon can already be there for them. And then they just have to put it where it is and in the right shape. So this was just a suggestion. Totally loose. If you like something else better, if it's better to just stick with the shape and not worry about the horizon. In the planetarium, we can talk about how it's not in the same place every day, even if it's not something that they journaled when they were at school. So, I don't know.
I like these ones too. And it says they're able to be downloaded. And that, I think it has exactly what we need, right? The horizon and everything, but it also gives them the chance to say what they think it looks like,
right,
and what it's going to be tomorrow. So, we can just download those and see. Okay.
I kind of like the idea of doing this, but also doing this.
I agree.
Because I think with the kids, I'd almost like to see this in a little booklet form, and then they turn to day 1 and they do the book, turn to day 2, they can do this, but then they also have to keep the calendar to see the shape of it. So we're doing the two things at once. They're locating it on where it is, but then they're also being able to see the actual pattern.
Yeah, I like that.
I agree.
Is the calendar kind of format with the circles, is that something that would be helpful for each kid to have, or would a classroom wall version?
I mean, we could do this as the classroom one.
Yeah, and I don't think it harms for the kids to have it too.
It could be the back page, and it could just be the 7, 3 or 5 days or 7 days, and we put 10 days in there. And then, they could, after we come in and we talk about it, okay, where did you see it on yours? Now let's turn to the back page and let's fill in the shape. Do you notice anything? And then just let it go at that.
And that might be where we can take care of any of those reversals, because they might draw it incorrectly, but we can make sure that they're doing it correctly.
And the benefit of that too is, I see them taking this book with them, and it is a keepsake. It's not just the lesson.
Right.
And so I like the idea of them having that model of the lesson as
Thank
well.
you for charge. We get to design it.
I love that.
I know you do.
So I've done it in about 10 minutes.
And we love that you love to do that.
We're just here because
I think that would be cute. They have a nice cover on it, and then they open it up, and something they can really be prideful in. And then, after they're done, that's their breakfast food cooked.
Yeah,
So
I love it.
I like that idea.
So I can write down Becky is going to.
Becky
Yes,
is.
we'll create that.
I'll watch her. I can do everything else.
So we'll have both the horizon view and the sort of calendar.
Yeah. Because you might be able to just create a color as insert. And then see how big that is download.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how cumbersome of a thing this would become if we're gonna do a lot.
Yeah. But if not, I can always make this.
Yeah, you can always, or shrink it.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that it's on a grid.
Yeah, that is neat.
And if we, I don't know we have to continue to go out and see what our horizon would be, but it would be nice if we could put our horizon in and maybe, I don't know, put a midpoint, because I don't think the kids, some kids would draw, no matter where it is, they're gonna draw it over here. So if they had a midpoint or some kind of indicators, maybe even 4 of them, like quadrant A or whatever, they would be able to reference it on that spot too.
That's what's nice, if we can make a cartoon horizon, even if it's not really detailed, that looks, with some landmarks that are actually in their horizon, so you can, direct them to know where is the moon relative to that telephone pole or that building, is it on the right or left of that, and if that's already on the
This is
horizon.
the problem we have with ours, is it's just gonna be a tree line. Because most of the time when I drive to work, it's on the right-hand side of the building over by the tree line. So,
Do any baseball fields or anything?
well, it's over the soccer field. It's a soccer field and that's the tree line. And I don't really know what's that way. I think it's more tree lines. So I have to look.
This being a new school to me, I just
Don't
know
have it
what's
memorized.
trees.
Well, I've been there 13 years and I really don't pay much attention to the outside.
This actually kind of brings up kind of it's a really interesting discussion about, where does the moon come up or where does the sun come up? And so, why is Stonehenge built the way that it is? And it's kind of like a astronomical observatory. A lot of the temple complexes in the Yucatan that the Maya or the Aztec or the Incas or any of the ancient cultures, even in the Egyptian, a lot of them were aligned with celestial phenomena, with moon coming up, sun coming up at different times of the year, the medicine wheels for many of the Native American cultures, that they have a set of stones out. And so it's kind of that point of view, where is the sun coming up, and so or the moon coming up. And so that would be kind of an interesting thing. You could even build something out on your field or your playground to use as some reference point. Of course, you end up having to always stand in the same place to use those reference points.
Yeah, I was thinking that you could make some artificial reference points on the edge of it. But you want to make sure that you're always in the same place and that thing doesn't get moved. So, I don't know how.
We did it in reference to the playground equipment. I understand that would be our point of focus. Or the basketball rim or whatever
If we went
it is.
over on the parking lot side and looked that way, we might be able to find out. The other thing I was thinking about, there is some kind of tower somewhere, but I'm not sure if
Yeah,
it's
there is.
whereabouts.
There's a lot of just,
So next time we go out, we'll have to look at 2 different things, on the moon, but also the reference points. Right?
We make a periodic trip outside. I'll be outside, she'll come out, or vice versa. Like, look at the moon. So,
You just want to escape right
Bring yourself on to take pictures.
that's a great idea.
I mean, I've been thinking about this, wait, who's at the other school? You're that idea. Okay. I was trying to think it would be great if the horizons weren't really crazy different, and I could actually go out and take a picture of the horizon and put it in Planet Hearing. So it's
exact picture and send it to you.
yeah, it's basically you just have to take a whole bunch of them overlapping, kind of thing. But we have another school that has a different horizon, and that's not that helpful to them.
And yours is very much more city-based
Yes.
than ours.
Lots of buildings and everything else.
Which is good for, reference marks when you're trying to draw.
Yeah.
Well, I'll show you, you'll laugh at what I haven't done today, but I'll make some cartoonish kind of thing, just so it's easy for kids to notice things. All right.
I'll help with the drawings of the horizon.
Okay.
That I can see.
I think that's everything I have for the first part. Anything else, Brian, on the pre-visit stuff?
I don't think so. I guess it always is good to remember that this is kind of a first effort at it, and so we've got next year to play with. And so if it doesn't quite go the way that you think it would like to go. We'll get to play with it again and refine it for next year. So it's, this is just kind of an initial start at it. So, and it's fun to listen to all of you talk about it. So I'm having a good time just listening.
Yeah, definitely, this is our first go. We keep telling ourselves that doesn't have to be perfect, but we'd like to, try to avoid any major pitfalls if we can do that. All right, so what I would like to do next, unless you guys have anything else about this first part, is just go in the planetarium. I can show you. I was hoping to have more of this put together, but I have it a lot more structured than last time, and just go through it like we would with the kids, and you guys can be like, whoa, that's not gonna work, or whatever, and we can talk about exactly how detailed we want to get, like we've already mentioned that we don't want to get too distracted and things like that. We want to keep the number of things we're trying to notice down to a reasonable number, a manageable number. So we'll go through that and try it so that will give you more information from what I need to put in there. And then we'll come back here and do the second, post stuff, about what should be done for that post instruction before our researchers join us and tell us more. Grab a donut if you want. You can ignore the sign on the door that says no food or drink. That's only for the students. Brian, I'm going to bring you with us, right?
All right, field trip. I love it.
Yeah, I was watching the video that you made of John's. You were walking all over the science center.
I know, that was pretty crazy. They're like, where are they? Where are they?
Busy. You can leave your stuff here. I'm going to close the door. It will lock behind us. And the planetarium door is unlocked. So if you go over that way, it should open. Just going to kick this closed. Yeah. It's locked, yes. It's heavy. You just got to throw it open. Trish. All right. I don't know how much you're going to be able to see, Brian, but I'll put.
The Blue Dome is good.
Anybody recognize this? This is Central Park. It was just one that had a nice, fairly clear horizon, but actually had some buildings. But like I said, I'll create something that's a little bit more personal. So this is sort of my rough draft of how this whole thing would go. We would start here, and at this point, I probably we wouldn't talk about the moon yet, other than we notice that it's not in the sky. But what we could do to whet their appetite is we're going to let the sun set, and stars will come out. And we would spend a little bit of time just talking about the night sky, because I think it's kind of a tease to bring people in the planetarium and not do something with the night sky. The moon is our focus, but to start with, if we're going to talk about noticing things, we can talk about some constellations and how the ancient cultures noticed the patterns in the stars. And while they didn't understand what the stars were, or the planets, or even the moon for that matter, they just noticed the patterns, and then they used their imaginations and made pictures in the sky. And so we can spend a small amount of time, talking about some constellations. I threw the Big Dipper way up there just because was lazy and that was an easy one to do. But we can talk about how you connect the dots and create stories. This will, come back to the Toad and Moon in the Moon story later about using your imagination and being creative, and again, being culturally relevant. So we could even put up a couple different constellations with different images because the Greeks saw this, but Middle Eastern cultures saw this. And so we can talk about how different people of different backgrounds make different pictures in the sky. But I figured we'd get a little bit of the night sky, and we'll do it first so that it's not Teresa and our other colleague in San Francisco said, if you do it at the end, that might be the only thing they remember when they leave the planetarium. So we'll do it first. And we can talk about, for a little while about some different constellations. And like I said, maybe make some cultural stories in there, put in some culturally relevant stories in there as well. But the other thing that we can notice is that here it is nighttime and there's no moon. So, we would say, oh, does anybody see the moon? Are you looking around? No moon here. So I'm going to clear off our constellation. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and fast forward our night and we'll watch for the moon and see if we can't see it. And I know when the sky moves, they get kind of crazy sometimes. And at this point, everybody would be yelling because the moon is now up. They would notice it right away. In fact, that happens even when I don't ask them to look for the moon. So we would have the moon up, and it's going to stop here really quick. So now this is pretty close to where the breakfast moon story begins. It's later in the day. I made it later in the day because I'm guessing that you guys wouldn't be out with them at 8 o'clock in the morning. So this is 9:30, and I can adjust the sky to whatever time is roughly when you would be out with them. But I wanted to make it kind of as early as possible, but certainly after they're definitely at school. So I picked 9:30. I don't know how appropriate that would be for you all. It would work, okay. And of course, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as when you guys go out, but I want to be somewhere in there, and definitely morning, because we're doing our breakfast moon. Now, here's where, you guys can tell me what works, what doesn't work. One thing I have to work on that you can't help me with is it's really hard to see a lot of detail on this moon in the daytime sky. It's better in the real sky than it is in here. And I've got to see if I can adjust the settings to make that a little clearer. And it gets worse as the moon gets small, you'll see in a minute. But I think we can fix that a little bit. But what I thought we could do is this would be set up to be whatever it was the first day that you were hopefully going outside and making an observation. So this would be one that they would already have in their journal. If they didn't, if it was cloudy that day, we could go back and fill it in at this point. What I did was I put up, and this is not fancy, it would be fancier than this, but a slide that would be corresponding to their journal. And it could be day one, or I put up a different slide here. It could actually have the date and the time. Depends on how we want to, on those log sheets in the book, it actually has a place for the date and a place for the time. We could just call it day one, day two as well, or not. We could get rid of the day one and just use the date and the time. But this was, I picked out May 24th, and before we leave today, we'll talk logistics, but this was one of the slots that we could potentially be doing this.
So I have a question.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you see there were should be, look at how the moon is right now. And look at how it's, I don't know how. Should we do something to show the kids? Because if you were to slide that back, when it got to about here, it would be probably right up and down. So I'm thinking, are our kids going to have some problem with why is it slanted and not straight up and down? Understand what I'm saying? Because when they think of something like when we show them there's fraction cards, the half is straight up and down. But yet this is tilted. So I'm thinking we might have to do something to give them some prior knowledge But just because it's slanted doesn't mean it's not a half.
Yeah, this will be how it will look to them when you go out to observe as well. Anytime it's low on the horizon.
That's why I'm saying we don't want it to fall straight down, we want it to fall backward. So since this is half on a tilt, instead of straight up and down. you could- So yeah, just. Yeah. Right.
Because it is, if you just turn something to the side, it's completely different than they've never seen it before.
Yeah, that might be a piece where I have to emphasize this, even with older kids, the shape is still the same shape if you tip it over. So that could be, you know, if you first have them go out and observe, and in the book, I'm thinking in the book, it always is straight up and down. But so you could talk about it either before you go out to observe or after the first chance they get to see it, and about how, hey, this is a little different than the book, because in the book it was straight up and down, and here it's tilted. But if we just turn our heads, it looks like the book. I think, you know, in their drawing, it's totally fine if they draw it tilted. But like you're saying, Barb, if that's going to be a source of confusion to them, that, hey, that's different, that's a different shape, then yeah, it sounds like maybe a little bit of class discussion. And you could even have some large cutout shapes, you know, of crescents and half circles, and play with tilting them, and they're still the same shape, they're just oriented.
I was wondering if that would be enough of a pre-teach.
Mm.
How else would we pre-teach it other than, I was thinking of, you know, like a ball with, you know, just the way the light would shine, you know, if you.
Right. I think we just need to decide, like, if they're gonna draw it, or do they draw it representative to what we see? And then when we do our classroom one, because if you really look at if you look at a diagram of the moon phases, they're always up and down.
Right, straight up and down.
So, you know, that's my only concern. The kid will come in and go, it's not half because it's not up and down. I can see that.
Right.
So that's, I'm just thinking, that was just something that went off in my head.
Yeah, I think if you had some shapes, and you know, I'm thinking now, you don't even have to have them be moon shapes. If you take like something complicated like a bow and you turn it sideways, it's still a bow, right? So I mean, you all would know what's best for your kids, but yeah, to actually have some things that are cut out and turning them to the right or the left doesn't really change their shape.
I think that's probably what we'll have to do, is just get enough of a pre-teach of that
Sure.
concept that.
Okay. So do you think having a little slide with the date is a good thing? Yeah, just so we can all make sure at this point we're using our journals and either referring to them and just confirming, hey, yeah, that's what I saw on May 24th. Or if we didn't have any data, we would fill it in. And this way, if the date's up there, we're not going to get on the wrong page. So I didn't create any more slides after day one because this was my template. But now what we would do is, if, again, we'll try for several days of observation at the school. I'll start, this will be the first day that they potentially went outside. And then we could say, okay, the next day, check on your journal and see what did you see? Was it the same shape? And we'll go ahead and put the next day up. Now here, and I'm trying to remember, it might have been you, Trish, somebody talked about how going from one day to the next, we should maybe actually run the sun across the sky and the moon and have them come back around at least once, instead of just magically popping 24 hours later. Does anybody remember we had this I can't remember whose idea it was, because we didn't want them to think that the moon was setting. We wanted to distinguish between moonrise and moonset and the actual motion of the moon. Now with a morning moon, it goes this direction as opposed to that direction. But we haven't, and we did already see things move from left to right across the sky. But I'm happy to do a one-day quick 24-hour thing just the first time, just to reinforce that. So if we did that, let me back up. We'd have this guy, our original moon, and then we would just kill this slide so that it is not in the way. And we would just run time forward kind of fast. And it could be faster than this, it could be slower than this. If it gets too fast, it's kind of crazy. But we watch everything set, the moon disappeared, the sun's gonna disappear, and then see our stars go overhead. And my crazy Milky Way, which is way too bright. And there's our moon back again. So this would be now the next day. I'm not going to be able to get it exactly the right time, but pretty close. So let me fix it because it's not, I didn't stop it quite in the right place. But that would be, making sure they know that the moon set and the sun set, and we come back the next day and we've got our journal and we can compare to yesterday, and hey, look at that, it's different. So I don't know if it still makes sense to do a quick day like that, and then from now on we can just jump 24 hours. Okay, so the one time around is a good idea. Okay, I'm just gonna make notes here. So we'll do one quick day. And then from now on, we can just say, okay, we're going to skip that part where we let everything set and rise. And here we would sketch it if we don't have it, or we would compare to what you have. And at some point, we're going to get to the end of the observations that they've done. And we'd say, okay, we're going to go to the next day, day 3. This would be the 26th. Where does everybody think the moon's going to be? And so we point. And you can see the lights are still pretty bright. I can still see everybody's hands. We can see where people are pointing. And we make a prediction as to where is that moon going to be in the next day. And we could either sketch or just make a prediction verbally. Is the moon going to be bigger tomorrow, or is it going to look smaller tomorrow? It would be hard to verbally make a prediction on shape because it's hard to describe it, but we could have them make a sketch to predict. The only thing there is if we want them then to, if they don't get it quite right, we want them to correct it. Do we want to have them erase it? Do we want to give them yeah. So, right. So you guys can all just point where you think it's going to be tomorrow if you want. We only did one day. We would have gone through 2 or 3 days or 4 days here, but then we'll pop the next one up. And we'd see, is everybody correct? Did you get it right? Is it, most people said it was going to be smaller tomorrow, and hey, it is smaller. And we could go ahead and sketch it again and notice that it's not in the same place. It's moved a little bit. So we can go to the next day. And again, we can have everybody point to where it's going to be. Is it going to be bigger or smaller or the same size tomorrow? And there we go. And we'll see if we get it right. Here's where it starts getting tricky. And in the book, we've now got cantaloupe for breakfast, right? We go to the next day. And my moon, as it gets smaller, gets really hard to see in here. Now, one thing I can do, like I said, I'm going to investigate on how to make the contrast a little bit better, but one thing we can do is turn off the blue sky. This may be too much of a distraction, but if we do that, then we can see it a lot better. Unfortunately, now it's dark and it's hard to sketch, and I would turn it back on. It may be that turning the lights off causes way too much distracted, Sometimes the kids go nuts when the lights are off because all of a sudden you can see the stars, and that's really cool. But that is a quick way to allow people to see it better. I'm hoping that I can just get the contrast a little better. Eventually, though, even in the real sky, it just gets too small and the sun is too overpowering for us to see. So that's going to happen no matter what we do. But we can keep stepping through the days, asking them, where's it going to be tomorrow? And it's getting really tiny. And the next day, and of course, if you are following it at this point, hopefully they're seeing the motion, they're kind of knowing where to look, and that helps. But the next day, it's really hard to see. And now even if we cheat and turn daylight off, it's really small.
I think that might be a good time, you might want to shoot a little.
Cheat a little, yeah. So at some point, of course, we can say, well, we can predict where it's going to be, and we know from our pattern so far that it's not really going to show up much, and we can just skip those days and leave them blank in the journal. And I'm going to go ahead and of course I would have my slides so we'd know, oh, this is the next day, even though I can't no longer find the moon. It's up there, and this is day, let's see, what day am I on? Somebody's been counting. Yeah, I've got the 9th. This is the 9th actually now, believe it or not. We went through 9 days. And if I cheat here, I'm not even sure we're gonna. Oh yeah, you can just barely see it. The other thing I can do that's easy, that's not as distracting, and of course, like I said, at some point when we turn it off, there's not gonna be anything to see anyways. We can just label it. And it's there, and now if we cheat with the label, you can see. But the very next day, I think if I use my cheat, it's not going to matter because we won't be able to see it. It's just going to be too tiny. So we'll go one more day, and if I turn off the daylight, it's pretty much invisible. But now if we turn on the label, you know, oh shoot, sorry. Yeah, it's gonna wig out on me here. Let me just put up our daytime moon again. So that's the wrong day, but that's what happens when I click too quickly. So it just starts taking off. All right, we won't do that. We won't do that when the kids are here. But yeah, now I can just put the label, and we really can't see it. And we can, like I said, turn off the daylight and just note that it really doesn't look like anything. It maybe just barely I can see a crescent, but that's only because I know what I'm looking for. You know, being really observant. Yeah. Okay. So you think turning the daylight off like that at least a few times is okay? Okay. What about the label of the moon? Is that labels? Okay. I mean, the label can be there every day, and that.
But I like the label when you can't see.
When you can't see it. Okay.
Because I think that shows kids that visually they can see it, but then it comes a point where they can't. But we're just letting you know it's still there.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do another day. And at this point, you know, we label it, and it's, you know, some of them might say that's not the moon, that's the sun. Well, the moon's not right in front of the sun, but it's right underneath sort of the sun now. It's, if you saw before, the label always is just to the right of the moon, so it's right about here is where it should be. But now if we use our cheat, we definitely, there's nothing to see there. And then we'll do the next day. So these would be, you know, where they wouldn't really have much to draw, but they could put an X where the moon is if we use our cheat. Not sure if we want them to, you know, have a cheat observation or just have a blank one, but they would have the date, and it's this whole time it's been 9:30 every day, and our little slide down here would have the date and the time, so we could still record it 9:30 every day. We keep going. Okay. Anybody see it now? Yeah, it was over here a minute ago. So now this would be, you know, people would have to find it, and we'd all point to it and help whoever's sitting next to you find it because it's hard to see. And again, we can label it, and we could use the cheat, although now I think, oh shoot, I did it again. I keep clicking in the window and it does this. I apologize. And get it back to where it's supposed to be. Stop clicking the window. All right, so there's the label. And I think, you know, we could probably draw that. It's a tiny, tiny little crescent. And then we'd say, okay, well, where's it going to be tomorrow? We're going to point at where we think it's going to be. Is it going to be bigger or smaller? Right before it was getting smaller. Now we'd want to guess at this point, maybe they would get it right, maybe they wouldn't, because they haven't seen it get bigger yet. But we'll step to the next day. Yeah, there it is. Oh my gosh, stop doing that, man. I don't know why I'm so click happy today. But
So are
there it
we,
is.
before we start this,
Mhm.
are we going to do any, always on the pre, whatever, informational?
Mhm.
As to why we always, I don't know, why is it that the moon, like when it was over here and we couldn't see it,
Mhm.
are we going to do any pre-informational about the fact that the sun is shining on the opposite side of the moon, so we can't see it?
We could, or you could leave that for in here. I'll give you the quick description that I give kids, because really we're not focusing on why the phases change, but that may be a very big question that comes up right at that moment, especially when it is completely dark. But usually what I would do is put up something that was a quarter moon, half light, half dark, and talk about where the light comes from on the moon, that the sun is the light source. And then I just simply talk about it being daytime and nighttime on the
Because I
moon.
think a lot of kids think that the sun has a light in it. They don't realize that it's not, the sun doesn't light up. That it, or not the sun.
The moon,
that The
yeah.
moon doesn't light up.
Right.
That it's the reflection of the sun.
Right,
So if you don't see the moon, it's because the sun is shining on the opposite side
right.
from what we see.
Mhm.
So, and I know I have 2 or 3 more advanced children in my
Uh-huh.
classroom who will question that.
Mhm.
And I, so I guess I'm asking, should we pre-inform the kids
Mm.
about that before we start teaching? Or just wait till it comes up as a question?
I don't know. I think my gut says talking about that the light on the moon comes from the sun is probably a something that can be in that initial, tied with the initial observations. I wouldn't get as, since they're not going to observe a new moon, I wouldn't worry about, taking it as far as, hey, what does that mean when it's all dark? But we could certainly do that in here. I think that's a natural thing to do, because there are going to be some kids that are like, what happened? And in the book, of course, the moon disappears and they don't talk about why. They just talk about that it's going to come back. Right? Does that make sense? Brian, I don't know if you heard all that or if you have a comment to it.
No, no, I don't have a comment.
Okay. But I think you're absolutely right, Barb. It's a good thing that's something that will probably come up. All right, so this is 9:30 in the morning. We've now gone, 15 days from our first observation. And at this point, I would ask kids, what do you think is going to happen next? And point to where you think it's going to be. And is it going to be smaller or bigger? And I don't know how many of them will get it, but next day, what happened to it? And so we'd say, well, where is it? Right? And I'm hoping that they would say, well, it's down below the buildings. Right? And so we can just fast forward time and see if we can find it. So we're all going to keep staring at over there where we think it went. And we're going to fast forward the time and see if we're right. Was it really there? Ha. So it was right where we thought it would be, just below the buildings. We couldn't see it anymore because the buildings and technically the earth was in the way. So we just had to move time forward. We had to wait until later for that moon to come up. This now stops at noon. Now, we could keep on going and have the moon continue to get larger. There's 2 ways we can do this. We can fast forward just a few hours, so now it's lunchtime out on the playground, and jump to tomorrow at lunchtime, the next day at lunchtime, but it's going to disappear on us again. So we would no longer have a breakfast moon, right? We have to come out at lunchtime now to see the moon. And then we could, once it disappears, we could advance to evening and have a dinner moon. Or we can flip-flop our sky just 180 degrees and say, that was the morning, the sun was over here, we kept coming out at 9:30 in the morning, Now in the book, what they say is it's going to be a supper moon. And so they jump to the other end of the day. So like I said, what I just did isn't a jump, it's just a slight creep in time. And now it's lunchtime and we can see the moon. But we could just from here jump to a dinner moon, a supper moon, and have the sun be all the way over here. And our time, our cheater slide would say something like 6 p.m. instead of 9 a.m. And the moon would be over here and we'd step like we've been doing for the breakfast time. So I don't know really which is best, to stick with the way the book does it, where we shift completely to a different time of day, or do we kind of let it slide a little bit until eventually it will be supper time. I don't know if you have a tough question. Yeah, that's the, I think just that last bit where we predicted where the moon would be, and we know it's, you know, our gut tells us it's behind those buildings over there, and then we just let it pop out. I think we're okay at this point. I don't think we've lost anybody. My concern is jumping all the way to supper time is like, oh, now there's this drastic shift. And it's not really, it's a gradual thing.
In their minds that it's now a magic trick,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to make that giant jump.
Because here, like I said, we could just step a day and it would keep doing what it's been doing. The moon would be lower tomorrow. It would be growing larger now, which we've gone from one side of the sun to the other. So hopefully with just a few observations, they'd quickly pick up, hey, it's getting bigger instead of smaller. And it would get lower and lower and lower until it would disappear. And then we would just naturally shift the sky a little bit to get our moon back. But we could, here we went from 9:30 to noon. Now we could go from noon to say 6 p.m. And the moon would be back up higher and then it would shift back down each day. So we could do, you know, a couple of time shifts, getting to the noon, getting to the afternoon, and there's no quick, you know, reversal of the sky. So I wasn't sure. And we could say, well, maybe do we really need to go every single day, you know? But I kind of liked the one day at a time thing because it is a gradual change. Right. It's not like it jumps, like you say, magically across the sky. You know, this is now June 7th. June 8th would be there. And then the next day, oops, we lost it again. But if we let time go, oh, there it was. You know, it was just hiding a little bit. And we can stop here. Oops, not go backwards, stop here. Until, you know, we'd say, well, let's go all the way until we're now home from school and have an afternoon snack. And the next day, I would come out and it would be there and there and there. And now we've almost gone through the whole cycle. So this,
a quick comment.
Yes.
You know, just maybe a caution about language, you know, talking about larger and smaller and,
yes.
You know, because it's not the size that's changing. And so one could conceivably think, oh, so this is a supermoon? You know, so, you know, being a little bit careful with our language and you know, in English, we have so many words that have so many different purposes that, you know, we conflate one concept with another one because we use the same word.
Right. So we would say more lit up, less lit up?
Well, I don't know. You know, you know, what would be a good third grade way to relate that so that we don't get them to incorporate the misconception that the moon is physically larger or smaller.
Right.
So what would be a good third grade way to relate that so that we don't, you know, either reinforce or create a misconception?
Right. What do you all think? Brian made a good point. I occasionally been using the words larger and smaller, but really we're seeing more of the moon lit up or less of the moon lit up. So we could say, are we seeing more of the moon or less of the moon, or more light on the moon or less light?
I would like to, I mean, if we're gonna, the semantics of it, greater and less than more and, or, you know, I, just because of the mathematical term, the greater,
Okay.
we're seeing a greater
So is
amount of
the
moon.
amount of the moon that is lit up is greater or smaller?
And then we get back to the other thing. You know, we spent a little bit of time on this. The last session is the amount of the moon that's lit up at any one time is always the same. It's unless you're having an eclipse, a lunar eclipse. And so there's always half the moon. It's just that we don't always see the full half that's all lit up. And so it's very, very tricky here of, you know, how to relate this without, you know, making them think, oh, there's less of the moon that's like, no, there's less of the moon that we lit up that we see. That doesn't mean that there's actually less that's lit up.
Right. So we'd say that the amount of light that we are seeing on the moon is greater or smaller than before.
I don't know, that's a hard one, isn't it? You know, it's always been difficult.
Back to what I was saying with the free information, is maybe the kids need to know, like we did that activity
The
last
styrofoam ball.
last time, when one of us stood here and then rotated around, that they need to see that the moon is always half lit, but we don't always see that based on where we're gonna stop at. Half lit, we took that the wrong way. But, you know, if you, depending on where you're standing at that moment, you're not gonna see that complete side that's lit up. So I don't know if there's a diagram or some kind of picture that can be shown how the planet Earth and the sun and how the moon, how it all rotates around so that they can get that. Because I'm having trouble seeing it. And I'm really having trouble. I told her that east is over there.
Yeah.
That's like really bothering me. To me, east should be over there. The sun really goes and sets. So it's really, I don't know. I know, we're facing south.
We're facing south, right. And in order to see the moon, you have to face south, because the moon is never in the northern half of our sky. So,
unless you're in Australia.
Right. For Pennsylvania
Yes.
is always on the south side of your sky. So that's why we always face south in here. I always have south in the front. But if you go outside, this is not south, by the way. We're not actually facing south in the real world.
And so this is where I know that, you know, I don't know who is talking there, but this is where I'm always a fan of, even with, you know, the younger children, I guess, even though we're not doing modeling with them, having the actual physical manipulation of objects rather than just looking at drawings on a piece of paper. The two-dimensionality of that doesn't always help with dispelling misconceptions.
Yeah. Yeah, the problem with the East-West is we're used to looking at the map. Right now, we're sitting on the map.
Yes.
So that is really tough for people to do in their heads. Of seeing, I'm looking at a map of North America, and West is on the left and East is on the right. But now I'm sitting on the map of North America, and so East is on my left and West is on my right. So that's totally two different things, and it's really difficult. Yeah.
But when I was sitting here thinking, wait, the sun's rising, if I'm standing outside, and it rises this way.
But it all depends on which way you face. Yeah. Right. So yeah, it's hard to not say East is left. East is always left. Well, no, it's not. If you're facing north, then it's on your right. But we happen to be facing south because we have to look that way in order to see the moon. So, yeah. All right. So I'm just going to make a few notes here. But other things that you guys are thinking about for this piece. Are we good with, do you think stepping through the days the way we've been doing it is good? With they would be making sketches and we would be pointing where we're going to be predicting where it's going to be next, whether we're going to see a greater amount of light or a less amount of light on our side of the moon. And then shifting it in small increments in time, does that seem to be what people are favoring, as opposed to just saying, okay, that was day 15, we're now going to jump to the evening? Because that's sort of what the book leaves off there. They say the moon's no longer a breakfast moon, now it's going to be a supper moon, which it is, but it's also a lunchtime moon. We sort of skipped some meals. And it doesn't actually show the progression, then they just have a little table, I think, for the day, the different days of the supper moon. But we could increment the time slowly, go 3 hours in the future, see, because I personally, not from a third grade point of view, but personally, seeing that moon that suddenly became hidden because it jumped on us, and then letting time flow and having it come back up makes total sense. That, yeah, okay, we saw it, it was right here. Now it's just down there. We just can't see it. So if we slide the sky, it'll come back up. And that just means that it's in the sky at a different time. Instead of 9:30, and I can even have a clock counting here that says 9:30, and then when time flows, it goes 10:30, 11:30 until we stop. And say, oh, now it's 12:30 and we just had lunch and that moon is just now showing up.
And that would actually be consistent with the book too, because there's always a clock in the room that they can show, and when they see it in the morning, to kind of show that they're looking at the same time too.
Right. Okay. Now,
Just a kickoff from that, kind of more of as a home study, that they could start doing that at home as a set, as a kind of more of an extension, and just providing them another, almost a journal set that they can create of what they see when they're at home each day. What does the moon look like when I get home every day at the same time?
Right.
And that would just be more of a, like I said, an extension, but not necessarily, required of us to follow up on it.
Right.
Yeah, for the advanced learner who takes on that challenge, it would be a great opportunity for them.
Right. And if we predict it in here, then they kind of know when to go out, go looking. As we'll go way beyond the current date. This will be a week after, we're looking at a week from now already on the sky. And then if we want, we can go ahead and let time go forward and actually make it dark so that we can really see the moon and that contrast. And we can still, ignore my crazy Milky Way there, we can still jump days here, and here's where we could maybe start talking about, and again, it would say, June whatever now, because we've gone a couple weeks in advance. We can talk about this pattern that we're seeing on the actual surface. And we could either have a different paper for them to draw a full, big moon with splotches on it, which I got to stop saying. Maria is the right term. There's no reason why we can't call it Maria, but I'm just always looking for small words. And we can notice if we want to take the time to do this, make the drawing, and you notice there are the splotches. And if we go the next day, the shape is still changing, but the splotches aren't. So that's kind of a cool backlit building there, Central Park. So we can, jump around in phase here and notice that the splotches are always actually the same. We don't always see all of them because the light isn't on them, but that splotch is still there. We're just not lighting it completely up. So we could spend a little time at the end with some of the patterns on the surface, and that leads into the toad and the moon for when they go back, and they could be thinking about that. And then we're back to our pretty night sky. But this is, of course, our supper moon now. All right. Okay, anything else? I'm going to back our time up, get our light back on. There's our evening supper moon. What else? Any thoughts that are coming to your head?
Karen, how much time do you think, and that's something that we need to take into consideration here, is that if we're shooting for, let's say, a 45-minute interaction with them, we want to make sure that we're, taking advantage of this, but we're also letting there be enough, I guess, other interests. And I guess you said that you take a look at the night sky and some of the constellations up front.
Right.
And so along with that, some of the interaction that you want to be able to have with the students, rather than just having it be a set piece where you kind of push play on yourself. How are you going to make this a little more interactive with them, other than just asking for group responses about?
Well, everything we're doing so far, they're journaling as we go in their journal, or at the beginning comparing to what they already have done if the weather cooperated. And then we're making predictions, and it will be just mostly group response just because of the nature of it. We're going to point in the sky to where we think it's going to be next. We're going to, take a poll on whether we're going to be seeing a greater amount of light or less amount of light on the moon for the next step. And then, like I said, I think the consensus is we'll shift the sky by 3 hours or something like that when the moon disappears, and recognize that what time of day it is now, and is this a breakfast moon anymore, and things like that. I don't have anything kinesthetic at this point. I think a lot of what we've already talked about will take a good amount of that time that we have, with just a small little sky tour in the beginning, and then this journaling and discussing what it is we're noticing with the pattern and the amount of light that we're seeing on the moon and its position in the sky, what time of day we're talking about. I think that takes up a lot of time. We could certainly do some kinesthetics, and
kinesthetics are hard to do in the dark. So
but we could bring out a light bulb and some styrofoam balls, and I know that's starting to get toward the causes of the phases, which we're not interested in. But if, like Barb was saying, that the kids might be a little confused about that new moon, that's a quick way to explain why the moon looks dark, that the light's really on the back side. I just don't know if we got 50 kids in here and we want to start handing out styrofoam balls.
Yeah. Oh, I could see how that would be a problem. So.
Yeah. So mostly I was looking at, them journaling, making predictions, notice, kind of as a group agreeing on what we're observing, what patterns we're seeing, and predicting what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
So, but
I see that styrofoam ball with the
Yeah.
flashlight being done at school.
okay,
So that they can, they understand why, not the phases, but why you only see so much light.
right,
So I think that's like a precursor to any of this.
okay,
You wouldn't have to worry
right. And like I said, I do sometimes just talk about that we're seeing day and night on the moon. The lit up part is the daytime part, and the dark part is the nighttime part. So when it's new, we're just looking at the nighttime part. When it's full, we're looking at the daytime part. So we could certainly incorporate that into our discussion.
Because I was sitting here thinking, I was sitting in, right in my bed the other day, looking at the window and saw the breakfast food. It was still dark, but it was north. Because my house was north on Shore.
Well, you were probably maybe looking northeast, is what I'm guessing. Well, I'll show you. Here's what happens if you look north. So you got to look behind you to see the moon. So now this is an evening moon. If we go back, I'll go all the way back to our breakfast moon. Here's our original breakfast moon. And if we look north, this is what it looks like. So it's back behind your left shoulder. So, so that's what happens if you look north. You got to look behind you to see the moon as it goes. Well, 202 does not actually run north-south. Most of the time, it's at some diagonal. It's funky, and the moon and the sun are not always running exactly east-west, because the rising and setting points are going to move to the south, east, and southwest in the winter, and they'll move to the northeast and northwest in the All right.
So right now, this moon that we're seeing is, now my head's spinning up this way.
Okay. This is our breakfast moon.
Breakfast moon, okay.
Yep. Yep.
This makes sense to me because I was thinking south, looking out my west window.
Yeah. If I put up our token slide, this is there's the one with the date and everything. So yeah, this is our 9 a.m. moon. So this would be our breakfast moon, and when it's a supper moon, it's exactly reversed. It's the same shape, but you got to flip it over. The light's on the other side because it's over on all the way on the other side of the sun. So instead of the eastern side getting the light, the western side of the moon is the one getting the light. So same shape, but reversed. And this is where, sometimes people draw it and they're like, oh, same thing. I'm like, no, it's actually not. It is the same general shape, but it matters whether it's flipped one way or the other. So you can't be real casual and go, a crescent's a crescent. Crescent pointing one way is different than a crescent pointing the other way. You're going to see them at different spots in the sky, different times of day, all that good stuff. So.
Karen, I just thought of something. If you wanted to do something kinesthetic and in there, and this is one of the things that I think a lot of people have challenges with is the path of the sun or the moon across the sky and if you sped it up in there. One of the things that I've seen done is with a group of people, you stand outside and you point, you kind of have your arms outstretched and you point to the east where the sun comes up, and then you point to the west where the sun goes down, or you could point to the east where the moon comes up and point to the west where then is it a little bit north of east where it comes up during, what time of the year does it do that? And then what is the path that it takes? And a lot of times people will have their arm go right straight up
Right.
From the horizon to rise, and then they'll kind of follow some arc across the sky. And so that would be something that might be useful, is to even have them kind of predict what they think that the path is across the sky for both sun and moon, and then actually follow it and note that their arm follows a nice smooth curve from horizon to horizon, and there's no jerkiness of going right straight up and then arcing across and then dropping right straight down. So
Right.
I don't know, it's just a thought that that might be a useful thing to incorporate here.
Yeah. I'm going to put a cheater line up just for you guys. This is not something I would do with the kids, but this is what Brian's talking about, is that's the path that the sun takes during the day. It actually is not, you notice there's our east and there's our west, and it's not going straight. Sorry, I got that wrong. That's the wrong line. Sorry. What is the line I want? This one? No. All right, now I can't find the line I want. Darn it. This is the problem with too many buttons. Yeah, that's not really what I wanted either. Yeah, I can't find the one I want. All right, doesn't matter. But if we just run time backwards, we can watch the sun came up, because this is, remember, this is now late May, so we're headed into summer. The sun is actually coming up north of east, so the line that I had up there was sort of okay for that. But if you run time forward, the sun does not ever go straight above us. It's close, but it doesn't actually go straight above us. And then when it sets over here, I've lost my west, can't see my W, but you notice it sets north of west. It doesn't actually set west. So that's a misconception that a lot of people have, is that the sun actually rises exactly east and sets exactly west. And it does that twice a year in March and September, but every other day it doesn't. So it's always east-ish when it's rising, and it's always setting over by the west, but it's not exactly east and west. So right now we're in winter. It comes up over in the southeast and it sets in the southwest. And the moon does the same kind of thing. It
So
stays.
it does change.
It does change. Yeah.
Okay, just like, all right, really great for my house again. And so like I was noticing when I started doing some guide stuff with NASA, that in the winter, it was taking a different path than it was in the summer when I was out boarding on my raft in the pool, trying to get away from everything. And I'm thinking, okay, so it does take a different path.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. In the winter, it's rising in the southeast, it's setting in the southwest, and it doesn't get very high. It makes this little tiny arc, which is why we don't have nice warm weather. And then in the spring, it rises in the east and it sets in the west and it goes higher up. And then in the summer, it rises north of east and sets north of west, and it goes quite high, but not straight over our heads. Never, ever, ever straight over our heads here in Westchester. So,
and then the other weird thing, not to complicate it too much, the other weird thing is that in the summertime, the sun is higher in the sky, but the moon is lower in the sky. And then in the wintertime, the moon is higher in the sky and the sun is lower in the sky. And so it's kind of this opposite sort of effect. And so the moon is actually up longer, you know, during the wintertime. So, you know, it's kind of this weird thing that one doesn't want to confuse people too much.
Right. The moon's path is always close to the sun's path, but they're not on the exact same path. So the moon is always a little bit higher in the sky or a little lower in the sky than the sun.
Or it's the same path, and it has to do with, you know, our tilt and how we're tilted relative to that path. So it's I don't know.
But for us,
the geometry gets complicated.
For in Westchester, everything is always in the south, though. You have to look south of the midway point to see either the sun or the moon all the time. They don't ever go into our northern half of our sky. Except for the rising. When it's way down low, it can be north of east and west. But once it gets up here, it's always over here somewhere, never on that side. All right. Anything else that we should look at here on the dome? That this general plan sound like it would work with the kids, you think? Yeah. Okay. And so far, because of the way we've done this, we don't need flashlights, which is just, again, doable, but probably another complication and another toy for distracting. So the only thing that we would do in the dark actually is the beginning, when we do a few constellations and talk about using our imaginations and how different people see different things. And like I said, I've got a few stories that I can tell that are kind of tied to different cultures. So we'll do a little bit of that. And then at the very end, looking at the actual Maria on the moon, it helps to have the lights off, because then you can really see the different patterns. But we don't have to keep them off. We can look at it, we can bring the lights up a little bit if we want to have them do a sketch, or maybe not even a sketch, just noticing that it's always the same pattern. But we could think about if we wanted to have them do one sketch, but we don't have to keep the lights off. I sort of feel like we can look at it, kind of think about it, and get it fixed in our brains, and then bring the lights up a little bit enough so we can see the draw. But otherwise, all of the sketching is done in this kind of lighting. So other than the quick cheater view, if we want to just see how much of the moon is actually lit up on our side, you know, we can quickly turn off the daylight for a minute and then pop it back on. Okay. Well, I think we should probably move back in the other room, and I'll bring my lights up a little bit here. But so if when, oh, sorry, did you have a comment? Yes.
When you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Can I beg a favor?
Oh, sure.
At some point, can we point out the North?
Mm-hmm.
So much of our African American history.
Mm.
Lessons and stuff, you know, we focus on the North.
Yes.
I think that'd be an awesome thing.
Yes.
For all of our work that we've been doing.
Yeah, I actually, that's one of my ones that I like to talk about, the drinking gourd.
Yes.
So do you guys talk about that in class at all, or
I do.
you do? Okay, so I can, I'm just going to throw up a sky here. So now we are still facing south, but Barb, we're going to go north. so I'm going to rotate it. Yeah, some people don't like this part. But now we're facing north, and we can, the thing I like to do is, let's see, let's get, let me actually pull up something that'll make it easier for me to do this. All right, so we have got our northern sky. We're going to put up, here we go. There's our Big Dipper. And then we have our Little Dipper. And these are not ancient culture images. These are more modern day. In fact, we call them asterisms instead of constellations, but most people know these, the Big Dipper and Little Dipper. The ancient Greeks actually made these. So these are the Big Bear and the Little Bear. And we can tell the story about how the bears got up there and why their tails look like that, because their tails are all messed up. But when we have them as dippers, then we can talk about the North Star, which its fancy name is Polaris. And typically what I would have people do is, there's this common urban legend that Polaris, the North Star, is the brightest star in the sky, and that's why it's so special. But you can quickly look around the ceiling and know that it's not. In fact, it's not even in the top 10. But it is special because if we let the sky move, so I'm going to let it move again. If you don't like the moving, you can look down. But if we let it move, what you notice is that's the only star that doesn't move. Everything else in the sky moves. In fact, our moon's going overhead. In a minute, the sun's going to come out and it'll go across the sky. But that star, Polaris, our North Star, does not ever move. So it's not anything special to look at. It's not purple, it's not flashing, it's not super bright, but it never ever moves. And the whole reason why it does that is it's right over the North Pole. A very total coincidence that it's there, just a happy accident. But that means when the Earth spins, that star doesn't move. And that also means that when you're looking at it, you must be facing north. So it's used for navigation at night. The sun in the daytime will get you east and west. Polaris, the North Star at night, will get you north. And because it's not really bright and it doesn't normally have its name next to it, it's not really easy to find. The sky doesn't move nearly as fast as what I just did. So when you're standing out in your backyard, it doesn't look like anything's moving. So the way to find it is using the Big Dipper. So if you go to the Big Dipper and you go to the last two stars at the very end where you would drink out of your spoon here, these are called the pointer stars because they point right at the North Star. And they will always do that. In fact, if I back this up, let's see if I can do that without messing it a bit too much. Well, I'll just do it this way. We'll go ahead and let it move again, but you can verify, even though this Big Dipper does move, those two at the end always point at the North Star. So if we do that again, you'll notice it's always pointing at the North Star. Doesn't matter where the Big Dipper is, just always straight there. So that's the way most people find the North Star, because it's not an easy one to find. And the story that we tell is that this constellation was called the Drinking Gourd by the African Americans in the early colonial times. When you're traveling at night and you want to make sure you're going north, because south is not the way you want to go, you need to find your North Star, and the way you do that is you follow the Drinking Gourd. The Drinking Gourd will show you where the North Star is, and then that's the way you travel. So that's a great cultural story. You can start with just spoons, you can talk about the Greek culture and the bears, and then you can talk about the African American culture and the Drinking Gourd and what it actually helps you do. So that's a really good story. We could absolutely do that. Sure thing. All right. Okay.
And when we get back to the room, I've got just a couple of comments about that, and I've got a couple of resources that I want to show you having to do with some of the cultural stuff too. So, but we can do that when you get back to the room and after you give yourself a little break.
Yeah. We will we'll turn our lights up in here. We'll take a pit stop if you need to make sure the donuts are doing okay, and coffee and everything. All right. I used to teach in here all the time. Go with it. You're gonna be sweating or freezing. I don't miss it. For sure.
It's chilly in your head. You don't notice it until they walk back out and hold up. If you ever seen it. Starting logistics of the field trip place,
Yeah.
probably the best participation, knowing my students. It would almost be great to organize them as they sit in the planetarium in a mixed classes. That way they're not. Yes. If somebody's gonna, I'm gonna have to sit next to him for sure. But thinking about intermixing them, that way the conversations would be way more focused on exactly what we're working on, as opposed to, somebody talking about Xbox or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure how to do that. But
We could just have a class list and every other kind of thing.
yeah.
Because there'll be a lot of room too, so we could even do like pairs, skip some pairs.
Familiarity of kids to kids. You might have better conversations if you knew that they were going to be focused. But it's like, a forced focus.
I think they'll be so excited though anyway.
The thing with my students this year, it's the pace that they move. Is really sloth-like. I can't figure out why. It's just like, there's nothing that motivates them to move quickly. And I think that if they were not necessarily hanging out with somebody else that was moving at that same speed, we might be able to get more accomplished.
We're just very low.
But slow and low.
I've never seen it in 32 years.
There are more donuts, please, help yourself.
Hokey is what they are.
No, unmotivated.
Well, it's not, I don't know, I see the college students and I try to engage them in class and ask them like, all right, is this red or green that I'm showing you? Seriously? Like, no, they don't want to answer. It's crazy.
It is kind of funny, they don't want to take that risk.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, I'm giving you a softball question. I could ask you, what's your opinion? Wow, okay. I'll just sit there. Okay, we're just gonna sit there until somebody answers. This is gonna be really uncomfortable. Some person will finally be like,
Well, it's funny because I personally was like that, even though I got into college. Or, in high school, I don't think I felt that way, but I was a good student, but I didn't really participate because there were others that did. And then I got into college and it was like I just sat there until I realized it doesn't matter if you're wrong or not. All the professor wants to see is you participate. So, when I started to realize that if I was wrong, they were going to help me get to the right answer. So rather than sit there and ask if I was wrong, or, think, I wonder if I'm wrong, or what if I don't know the answer? Just give an answer, and then if you are, then you'll find out what the real answer is. But yeah, it's a real being comfortable with yourself and not worrying about what other people think. That's really hard for a lot of college kids.
I actually saw a thing, a friend of mine who teaches, I don't know, it's elementary middle school, but had this thing for the classroom that was, what is struggle time? What is time is struggle time? And what should you do during struggle time? What should you not do? And I was like, I need this. But that's what happens. They'll always say, well, we want examples of what kind of things are going to be on the test. So I'll give them the sample problem and I'll say, take 2 minutes and work on this. Over half of them get on their phone and they're just texting because they know in 2 minutes we're going to go over it.
Right.
They'll just wait until I give them the answer. I'm like, see, then they go, your test was so hard. Like, that's because you never practiced. Right. When I did your test for practice, you just waited for me to Is it right answer? That's really, yeah, this is struggle.
Our graders are like that.
Oh, well, they don't
want to work until, they know you're eventually gonna go over the answer. Yeah. And then you get to the test and it's like, I can't do this. But
Productive struggle is more my struggle than theirs.
Oh,
Struggling.
all right. So
you
the,
can't find.
can't find the.
The pages.
Oh, really? Do you know anything about this, Brian? The templates for the journals for Breakfast Moon are supposed to be online.
Oh, the one that's in the book?
Yeah.
So what's the, I know that there was the one template that is in that you could print out that's in the University of Fingertips, which is a little bit different than that one. Teresa would know more about it because Teresa had been, was one of the ones who worked on some of the book content. And so if she was on this morning, then, it's unfortunate because she would be able to tell us more about that.
That's all right. I can get in touch with her. Yeah, it's supposed to be on the My Sky Tonight page. Supposed to be able to download the Moon Journal, but perhaps, did you find anything?
Yeah, I found the page and everything, and there's different links, but I just can't seem to find the actual.
I have to admit, I haven't tried to actually
Moon
find this
Journal.
one on there because I have all these other ones. But if we want that format, we can. I can talk with Teresa and see if we can get those. Make sure that they are available. List of things. So the last part is the follow-up piece. And the things that we had talked about before was doing more of the cultural relevance piece. So like we said earlier today, maybe follow up with Tony Moon. But things that, other ideas that I had that you can weigh in on whether these are appropriate or not, were now that they will have a sort of a more or less complete Moon Journal that will go through. We can make sure that it goes through the entire cycle. And you can use that back in the classroom to try to do some predicting, and say, all right, we saw, this breakfast moon and we decided that it, looked like a bowl of cereal or whatever it was. When are we going to see the next breakfast moon just like that? And if you have the calendar, that page where they've just transferred just the shape and not worried about where it is in the sky, and say, when is it going to be this shape again? You could actually say, well, we think how many days it took to get from that shape to that shape again, and we know that was on Monday. So you found on the actual calendar, 28 days later, hey, it's going to be June whatever when that moon comes back around. So just we could try to ask some questions where they have to use their observations to make predictions beyond just tomorrow's moon. But if I want to go take a picture of the moon in the morning, what kind of moon is best for that? I don't want it this little tiny sliver where we can hardly see it, but I know that these other moons aren't even out in the morning. Or if I want to take a moonlight walk, what kind of moon would be good for that? We need one that's up at night, not a breakfast moon, but a supper moon, things like that. And we could try to figure out when would we want to take that moonlight walk? Is it going to be 2 weeks from now or next month? So just some things like that. But maybe that's adding too much. I don't know.
Karen?
Yes.
Before we get too much into the discussion about putting this together, could I show everyone a couple of things, and then I have a couple of comments about the culturally relevant pedagogy, and because it's much more than just a multiculturalism in bringing in that different cultures have done this, and I think that when we think about culturally relevant pedagogy, that it's more of an inclusive thing for the individuals in the classroom and less going and demonstrating how these different cultures have incorporated these themes into their societies, which that's important too, because it helps people to be able to say, oh yeah, well, the people that I came from were interested in this, but it's much more to do with making sure that the classroom environment is inclusive for them as individuals. And so a lot of it has to do with the sorts of discourse that goes on within the classroom. How inclusive that is for all of the people and how it's honoring their stories and their points of view rather than just, I guess, dictating, one specific teacher-centric sort of view of what's going on. So, and that's something that I'm hoping that we can get Maria to come in for a session, a Zoom session at some point. And we need to, think about, I need to talk to her about that a little bit more and then set up a time. But I wanted to, thinking about some of the different cultures, there's a few resources. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if I can actually get this to, let's see. Are you seeing this that says African Cosmos? Are you seeing this?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a nice website. And I'll put these in the chat so that Karen can share those a little bit easier. But this is a nice thing. It was, I think it was an art museum, the Smithsonian Institution, and then it showed it was a visiting exhibit. And so this is probably, 7-8 years ago, something like that. And so they had this big exhibit called African Cosmos, and it's a real integration of art with some science content. And so some of the modules in here, ancient sky watchers, some Egyptian astronomy that was done. Without the moon, there would be no life. I think that's kind of an interesting thing that a lot of them, and so do you see this with the little boy with the moon phase on his face here? Did it shift there? So a lot of the different cultures, they incorporated this into their, the lunar phases into their ceremonies. And so they would paint their face with the different moons. I've never watched the Sons of the Moon DVD. I don't know what that is, but it looks like it was interesting. You can get a copy of something here. So, you have to buy the thing. So. The National Museum of African Art, that's part of the Smithsonian. So this is kind of a nice thing about some of the astronomy that was actually done in Africa. A lot of times we get this Western European-centric idea that that's the only place that observing in science went on. But there's actually some science and some incorporation of this into the African culture. A few years ago, there was our friends at the Space Science Lab at the University of California, Berkeley, they partnered with some people, including some people from Mexico, to produce some resources that they call Calendar in the Sky. And so a lot of the focus on this was on the Mayan calendar and how the Mayan kept track of time and how they had this very elaborate system of actually keeping track of Venus. Venus was, in a lot of ways, the basis of their overall calendar because they didn't experience seasons like we do here further north. And so things were pretty much the same. So they had to have other clues. And so they were less tuned into the changing solar seasons and more into the, I guess, the cycles of Venus in the sky. Another one, NASA has actually been working on this. The Astrobiology Institute of all people they've had this effort that they've been working on with the Navajo Nation the last few years to be able to incorporate more of the indigenous ways of knowing, I guess one might say. And I think it was kind of interesting that one of their educators' guides, and you can actually download these, and they call it Navajo Moon. And so they have a lot of background about the moon and the phases of the moon and how they utilize this in their culture. And so, and then there's a little video here called Navajo, Our Mother Moon. So that would be something, and I'll send all these links into the chat so that Karen can share this with you. And then there was another one. There's a friend of ours who at, I think it's St. Cloud University in Minnesota. And Karen, I don't know if you know Annette Lee. She runs the planetarium there, but she's also an artist, and she's also Lakota Ojibwe. She says that she's bicultural for that. You know, a lot of times we don't have that. You know, what do you mean it's bicultural? Well, there's two different native groups that she's descended from, and so she considers herself bicultural. And so she's incorporated a lot of this into, it's a real blending of the native culture with the science, because she is an astronomer, and she's also an artist. And so all of these things kind of blend together in the programs that she develops, both in the planetarium, but also for the educators in Minnesota and elsewhere. And so they have a lot of really interesting things. And a lot of this art that's on here is her art. And she actually has some, let's see if I can. And so she actually produced these star maps. And so there's one for the Ojibwe, there's one for the Lakota, there's a constellation guide for these. And I think that she's made a couple of others recently as well. So there's some really interesting resources that are out there if you want to bring in some of these other cultural perspectives. And that's one aspect of this, but the other aspect really is of honoring the students' voices within the classroom. And I think that that's what we're probably looking at more with the culturally relevant pedagogy, is making sure that their voices are honored and brought into the conversation. So, and we'll find out more about that as we go on here, and hopefully have Maria in, or maybe a special session just on that, and we'll bring in the first grade teachers for here on that too. So anyway, I just wanted to, you know, bring that out and share those with you. So
And I'll make sure to put those links in the shared drive.
I think sometimes it would be a very easy thing to do, is to look at the legends and the traditions, and if we're not careful, making it sound like it's silly. You know, that the science compared to the story and to the tradition and to the value. That I appreciate that we're thinking about it this way, because otherwise I really do believe you can dismiss it like those silly people, and that you're dismissing a whole group of people in that process, and that's gotta be protected. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, even when we talk about constellations, I like to stress to the kids that the people back then were really observant. You know, they noticed way more than they notice now. Even though they didn't understand what they were looking at, they just were really, they paid attention.
They didn't have the distractions that we have.
Like, nowadays people are like, what? The sun's higher in the summer? You
Maybe
know?
there's a sun out there? Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, and I think that we rely so much on the technology that we don't give any credit to the human ability to, you know, to make those connections on our own. Right? So,
Okay, so I know Allison is here, but I don't know if she's stepped away, but she's our researcher, but Allison, can you hang out for like 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, cool, because since we're kind of doing this sequentially, I wanted to talk about the wrap-up session after the planetarium, which we've already talked a little bit about beforehand, but kind of want to make sure we have a good idea of what we're doing there. So that's when we talked about using the Totem Moon activity And like I said, I can introduce the idea of the pattern on the moon, not the shapes, but the pattern on the surface of the moon in the planetarium, and then that can be followed up in the classroom. And then there's the puzzle, right? That lunar phase puzzle with the really cool pictures. And I basically made a Word document of those images. The images were really big and pretty. And if you want the full-size images, I can put those in there as well. But what I did is cut and paste them into a Word doc so that they're all about 3 inches. And the way I've used them in the past is I laminate them and then you can have the kids see if they can get those in the right order, just following the pattern that we've now journaled. But those are clear enough images that the Maria show up quite well. And then the 2 crescent moons are about the same size. But if you look at the pattern on them, they're not the same. And, like I said, I'd be interested to see how many of the kids pick up that this crescent and this crescent. Yeah, I can turn them the same way. And then they're basically, I've had kids say, aren't these the same? And I said, well, what do you think? Don't ask me, you take a look. These are good enough that you can look at. Yeah, these aren't actually the same part of one's one side and one's the other. So, I mean, part of that depends on your printer too, but I think they're high quality enough that just a regular printer can get it. So, I don't know if you all feel like the kids could handle that extra level, having talked about the pattern on the moon and seeing that it's always the same and we can make different things out of it, but it can also be used scientifically to determine that this crescent shape is different than that shape. It's this side of the moon versus that side of the moon. But I think that regardless, using that activity would be a good follow-up to see if they can now put them in the right order, that the moon starts with this. And honestly, we've been always doing this starting with the breakfast moon, which I always think of as the last half of the cycle. This is my thing, Barbara. We always start at new moon. And then we go from there. And here we're starting in the middle at the waning gibbous. And it's really bugging me. But it doesn't matter because it's a circle. It goes around. You can jump in any point of the cycle and get it back to that same spot. So they, having done it at school and having done it in the planetarium, they may immediately grab that moon and start with that. But it doesn't matter what comes after that, what comes next. And then I don't know what you think about focusing on the patterns on the moon and seeing if you can get it correct that way as well as like an extra layer to those pictures.
Personally, I think that's what's helping me to
line them up.
line them up.
Yeah. I think, different people have different levels of observation. Some of them just gravitate right towards the shading and don't even notice that, oh, there's this one little splotch here, or it's always on the edge, but other people will pick that up. So, you could have them do this in groups or pairs or something, and then that might be people contributing their different ways of noticing, which is always a great conversation to have. So-and-so noticed this, but so-and-so noticed that, and they're both good observations, and they're both helpful.
Because I'm having a tough time.
I am.
Because I'm looking at the craters.
Yeah, the first thing you can try to do is just orient them all so that they're facing the same way based on what you can see.
Because I think the Maria is what helps me to know how to orient them.
I realize the really tiny crescents get tricky because you really don't have a lot of surface features there.
Are we supposed to be doing this now, or do you want
You
to?
can't, no, by all means, because we didn't have these last time. Have a nice day. And just because it's easy, there are equal numbers on either side of the full moon. It's a symmetric stack.
Okay, I know.
That's good to know ahead of time, but you don't have to tell the kids that.
They're great pictures.
Yeah, they are really good pictures. You can thank Brian for collecting the pictures. And like I said, you could make them even bigger. You can make them 8.5 by 11 each, and I don't know if that would help being able to see more features.
Yeah, can you put the 8 by 11s in there?
Absolutely.
I think it'd be nice to have one big class set, but
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, you can put them up on the board.
I'm working on it.
Maybe my pattern is too much.
Your pattern. I feel like that's would be my. And then this one.
And can you tell me if I'm right?
If this is correct. I noticed one. Oh. This is that.
Okay, okay.
It's hard to tell, but you notice a little crater.
Yeah.
there?
Mm-hmm.
So that'll.
Okay.
That's one that I.
Yeah, that's called Mercrisium. The favorite.
Oh, yeah, that makes more sense.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was gonna say that. Yeah, because now I don't have to look like I did.
Yep. This is, the only thing is you would. There you go.
Oh, like, so I'm not very nice.
So it's
Yeah, that's a good idea.
more.
Taking a picture, that's a picture.
So, yeah, so that you can see, you have to really pay attention to the details if you want to get them on the right side. But, if they don't, what will happen is you'll get 1/2 of the phase, right? It'll start as a little tiny crescent, and they'll build up the full, and then there won't be anything on the other side. And that's fine too, because they recognize that it goes from not much light to full light, but there is that detail if you want. And by the way, in the folder on the drive, the document hasn't been ordered.
Okay.
The little sheet where they're all 3 inches, they're all.
Yeah, that's something we have that, the middle part.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, like I said, you might find that there are kids that just don't see the pattern,
Right.
right? Because I'm learning, everybody sees patterns differently. I thought it was pretty, universal, but. All right. Got it? There's your little crater there. But- I think they're just reversing that.
Oh, there's a little crater.
So Big Maria. And then there's little Maria Prayer.
That'll be fun for the kids.
Could be for those kids that you said that, you know, are that next level, it's a big challenge.
Yeah.
If we had to, you could take out.
It's missing a thing down there.
But you number them and then I'll match them up.
Like I said, the document that you'll have access to has the numeric order. Right. So does that sound like a good sequence for follow-up, this little puzzle, and then more of the totem, looking at the Maria pattern?
So are we gonna do these interfaces pictures as pre-assessment too?
Well, that's what we're gonna ask Alice.
Okay.
Because I know she's been patiently waiting. I told her 11. Hey, Allison.
Hello.
So Allison, we have our 4 teachers here. We've got Becky. Is it Becca or Becky? Becky. Denise, Trish, and Barb.
Hello.
So, because I know last time Kristen was here and you weren't here.
Yes. So we decided that it was a good idea for everyone to see both of us. Plus, I you know, didn't want Kristen to have to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning like Brian.
You're
I
in
gave-
Ohio?
I am in Ohio, yeah. So I'm on Eastern time. Makes it much easier. Getting ready for lunch.
So I know you had some stuff for us and then we have questions for you. So
Okay.
What order do you want to go in?
I am free to do whatever order makes the most sense.
Okay. Kristen and Allison have some documents for us, which I'm just realizing I didn't print here. I have it right here on my screen, but I didn't print. So do you want to tell them about the documents?
Sure. So I believe the last time you met, Kristen talked about the consent forms that we would be giving to both you as teachers as well as to the parents and students. We are still in the process of getting the student/parent consent form in Spanish, but hopefully by the next meeting we will have that ready. So basically the consent forms, there's a letter on the front page that kind of invites you as an educator as well as the parents and the students into the study and what they're going to be participating in. And then the second and third page is the actual consent form. And we've bulleted out the activities that students will participate in on the parent form. And then on the teacher form, it's activities that both you as the teacher and your students will be participating in as part of the research. We tried to make it as short as possible because I know that was a concern. However, we had to make sure that we complied with a lot of the language that IRBs request, such as like talking about the risks or the benefits of participating in the study, how we're going to keep everyone's information confidential, because we are going to be doing some audio taping and video recording of these sessions. So when Karen shares them with you, and I think it'll be fine at the next meeting to have these printed out, we're asking that you as the educator as well as the parents and teachers, you have the opportunity to check whether you agree to be video recorded or not. And the parents and students have the same option. And so we can talk about logistics of how that will work if there are groups of students whose parents say that they don't want to be video recorded. We'll just have to be very conscious of that when we do the video recording.
I'm just sharing the document on my screen here so they can see it, Allison. So I wanted to show the bullet points.
Yeah, and if it's something we want to add into the drive so it's available for everyone, I think that we can do that as well. So this was the student survey
Right.
Or sorry, the student form. And since the students are, I believe it's above the age of 7, they too have to consent to participating in the study. So even if their parents consent, we still have to ask the students whether they would like to be video recorded or not, and we have to honor that. So if the parent says no, then automatically we're not going to video record the student. But if the parent says yes and the student says no, then we won't video record that student.
I've never had that happen. The kids usually don't like the attention.
Right. They're normally running in front of the camera.
So this is what I will put this in the shared folder. So
Okay.
Oops. There we go. All right.
Has that document been shared with the administration?
It has not, but we can do that.
So if a family says no, they can still participate in the activities, they're just not going to be videotaped.
Right, we will do what we need to.
And what I'd say is we will try our best to make sure that they're not on videotape, and we will make sure not to include their data in the study.
Or will you be coming out to videotape, or will we set the videotape up ourselves?
Karen actually will be videotaping.
Yeah, that would be mostly me. So, and we will, this year, we're actually only going to videotape one classroom. I will visit all of the classrooms, but we will only just videotape one. We're still working on it.
Yeah.
And it'll be I'll just be random kind of thing.
So I guess at some point we'll have to draw straws to see which one gets. I want to make.
Some kid parents said, "Go ahead."
Oh no, I also wanted to clarify one thing too. Is that and Allison, I sent you a note, and maybe you didn't get it. We may not have. We had originally planned that there were just going to be 2 in-person meetings like this, and so I think that we'll probably end up having a couple of other virtual meetings that are much shorter than this to go over some of the details of this. And so we may not, unless the consensus is that everyone feels the need to get together for a longer term, as long as we're feeling pretty comfortable with the lesson sequence that we've been working on today and a few weeks ago, then we may not need to have another long-term meeting. But if the consensus is that you'd like to do that, then we certainly can figure out when that is. But I think that from a programmatic standpoint, we were thinking that 2 like this were going to be adequate, and so we may not get back together for getting copies to them like you.
Okay.
So, anyway.
No, then that's fine. We can email back and forth.
Well, I had the thought that because we're wanting to have, we have these 2 in-person ones, but I'm also thinking that we're going to have 2 virtual ones. One, I want to get Maria Veralas, our culturally relevant pedagogy advisor, to spend an hour with everyone so that everyone understands what I guess we're talking about, so that we as the program people understand that as well. NSF has a notion of what that means, and we're still trying to figure out what that means ourselves. And so that's why they asked us to put this advisor on our advisory board to help us with that. And so we're still figuring that out. And so we'll bring her in to help us figure that out. And then I figured that the second one, as we get closer to the actual implementation of this in the classroom, which we'll have to take into consideration, when this is going to do, I was thinking that we would have another 1-hour webinar that would just basically be Kristen and Allison going over the research protocol a little bit more detail. And so that was one of the things that we were going to talk about next week, but it's kind of came up here. So
No, that's perfect. And we are on board with that. And so we can talk logistically about how to get the consent forms to you. I guess one question that we had for everyone was, do we know when these classroom visits are going to take? Do we know when the implementation is going to start?
That's the last little bit for today. So let me just put that on pause. We had a question for you because we saw the bullets, the kids are going to do a pre-survey. One of the activities that we're doing as a sort of a culminating, post-planetarium visit thing is a puzzle of the moon shapes. And the teachers were thinking that might be a good pretest to kind of see what the kids know ahead of time. I didn't know what all you had planned for the pre-construction survey, and if that would be useful to you, or if that's something that you wouldn't want them to do, or you don't care either way, or.
Yeah, so I think that suggestions are always welcome. We submitted a draft and to the IRB, knowing that it is just a draft. They know it's a draft and that it can change. And part of our pre-survey is really going to depend on what you guys are planning on doing in the classroom, because we want to make sure that is reflective. So I think that is a great thing that we should really think about adding. And it may not be the entire puzzle. One thing that we were thinking of doing was having kids draw different phases of the moon. I believe that was a question that was on the survey. I believe the third grade survey was less than 5 questions. So we're really trying to keep it really short. It's really low stakes. And I think since you guys are planning on doing this as a pre-activity anyway, we will be video recording it. And then if you're doing it after the visit, we'll video record that as well. So it may not be a formal, on a formal survey, but we can still capture that change.
You think that is a good thing to try in the beginning before any instructions into the phases, just see what they come up with and not really discuss it, but just, okay, that's your first guess. And I know in the past, sometimes people have used that where they've taken the pictures and had the kids take them down right in the order, and then either set it aside, hang it up, whatever, and we'll come back to it later. But for now, that's just our first guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then they would be videotaped as well for the one class.
I think that would be awesome for the kids to be able to do that, because then they're going to be able to see very visually the learning, and then how they make those adjustments and correct what they thought. So I think that would be really beneficial for them as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good artifact to have from the beginning to the end. So if they paste it on a sheet of paper at the beginning and then they do it at the end, and they can really reflect on, well, how was my thinking different at the beginning of this learning compared to at the end.
We had a question as a team. Are you looking? We know you have surveys for the teachers as well. Is that true? Should they be, besides our classroom visits, which I'll be visiting all of them, an audio recording, and then there's the video recording for the class. Do you want them to be making any notes about how things are going or what they're seeing? So
I think it's really going to depend. I know when there were some different activities that were talked about, like moon journaling, and obviously we're not going to, Karen's not going to come to the classroom 10 days in a row to capture these moon journals. So once we have that curriculum, that sequence in place, I think we need to decide what is it that we are trying to capture and how can we capture it. If it's beyond the 3 lessons, and it could just be a quick jotting down quick notes, and we put on there maybe a survey. So we're kind of leaving that open based on the sequence of what makes the most sense. So it could just be a quick question at the end of the 15-minute activity, or it may be a short survey at the end of the sequence. But I think Kristen talked last time about getting together at the end of everyone doing these instructional sequences and kind of having a focus group, talking about what worked, what didn't work, so we can inform for next year.
That's actually a really interesting point, Allison, that you bring up and that they bring up too, is that when we originally wrote this, we had this idea that there would be a discrete day where something happens then there'd be the planetarium, then there would be another discrete day. But it's turning out that in the discussions with all of you and with the discussions with the first grade teachers here, it's turning out that no one is thinking about, oh, you're going to be able to do everything in this one day. No, it's going to be spread out much more over many, many more days. And so, but we're only budgeted to come in one pre and one post. And so we're going to have to sort out how to best do that. It's just one of those quirky things, but we want to make sure that it's working the best for the students, because that's what the whole purpose of this is to see whether or not this leads to learning gains or learning changes on the part of the students. And so, and that's why we have all of the teachers in the development group here, rather than just coming in and saying, do this. That doesn't work real well. So.
All right, cool. Do you all have any questions for Allison about? Allison, did you have anything else that you needed to make sure we know?
I don't think so. I didn't really have a list of things before, so.
Okay, cool. So the only thing I have left on my, one logistic thing, and this is not for Allison, but for Brian, but we have money for school buses for you guys, but what the ASP needs is an invoice, which I realize you won't have an invoice until you make the reservation and all that stuff. But just keep in mind that once you make a reservation and you have school bus and this charge, then the school can send, you can give it to me if you want, but the people in California, they get the invoice, they will then reimburse the school. So that's basically the.
Doesn't come from the school district, come from the bus company. And then it won't come from the school district, it'll come from the bus company.
And they don't usually do anything until
after they make the trip.
Okay, so as long as we have an invoice for what it's going to cost, it doesn't matter whether it's happening or not.
Okay.
We have something.
Invoice or some documentation of the expenditure of bus money. So.
Well, I started looking at that again because it depends on what it's different depending on whether we're going through the moon phases the way the book does it, or like my favorite way to start and get new moon, which the book doesn't do. So the April, if you start observing the moon on April 5th, then what happens is you're not doing it like the book. You can see the upper moon first.
Even if we start in March.
If you start in
April 5th was going to be the visit.
Oh, April 5th was going to be the visit.
Right.
For some reason, I did not write that down. All right. So if you start in March.
I think we looked that up and we
I
said
think we
that.
said March 14th.
Yeah, I have March.
Quarter moon is March 14th. It's an afternoon.
Right. So I have actually March 12th. Starting with the book does. And then somehow I wrote down March 22nd. That was just the closest Friday. I don't know why I didn't write it down. All right. So yeah, if you start around March 11th, 12th, or whatever in there, you'll start seeing it at school around 9:30, just like we saw in the planetarium today. And then we can do April 5th. I can do earlier than that.
Well, you're away the 15th,
Oh, we don't know, 14th.
And
and
then
I'm away on the 22nd.
So the March 29th is.
Yeah, well,
We have
Oh, that was why. Okay, so it's, I don't know why I didn't write this all down. Okay, so that will give you lots of time to observe the moon. And it will no longer be a breakfast moon by the time you come here on the 4th. Okay. And that's, you know, if you, oh, no.
You know, when's spring break for all of you? You're all in the same district, right?
it's April, could be the 17th through the 22nd, but if we have snow days, it'll only be the 19th through the 21st.
So what's the? No, okay, so there is a little bit of a hitch. And that is, if I need to come in and observe when you like do the book reading and the initial stuff, I am out of town the 8th, March 8th through, that's Carson. So it depends on how, like, I think the idea was starting with that probe, the sheet, and then reading the book and then going out and doing observing. So do all of that before I leave on spring break. Then you could observe the moon while I'm gone, and then after all of the other stuff.
We could do the 4th, we could book the 4th, the 7th, Friday,
So, yeah, if you were doing things on the 4th, the 5th, and 6th, depending on the
Yeah.
time and whatnot, I could make some visits there.
That can be when we're doing the pre-survey and
Right.
the draw to see the moon.
It does get tricky. The issues are that I'm pretty much locked into
sure.
class on Mondays and Wednesdays. Pretty much the whole thing days are in class. So Tuesdays are like my open
So
time.
the March 5th.
That's fantastic.
But it's not until 12.
Not until 12, but it's only the morning.
Right.
So we have.
Yeah, and I don't have the morning.
What's Tuesday?
I was realizing how complicated this is, mostly because I'm by myself here and I don't have any staff to say, oh, well, someone's having fun, like coming to your class tomorrow. Yeah, Thursday I'm on a plane, unfortunately. Well, the other thing that what I had been looking at, because I realized April suddenly gets into PSSAs, is to push this back until May. And I don't know if you guys are wanting to push it back that far. But that would be like May 9th, 2 months later, May 8th, 9th.
Would you need May 9th for the planetarium? Or
No, it would be May 3rd, like May 13th.
Not sure when I'm getting those ideas.
Our field trip is on the 17th.
All right, I have a field trip on the 17th.
Oh, you guys have a field trip already on the 17th.
Yeah, so the Franklin Institute.
Uh,
I gladly cancel that.
Do that.
I'm
um,
not gonna have-
I mean, it wouldn't have to be May 13th. It could be later than that, after Memorial Day or something like that.
Well, the problem is the 24th, we are in because that's our second snow day.
Yes.
So we could do the 24th.
That is one day I can't do in May, but I could do after all of this Memorial Day stuff. My schedule's wide open. So it could be the 28th, 29th.
So we could do any day the week of the 27th,
Is this just the field trip or we
just the field trip.
Just to come here for the planetary meetings. And then, but you could start observing the moon for that month. It would be around May 9th.
As I'm thinking, if we don't also change the date of our observations, there's too much space in between them.
Yeah.
Well, we can't do the observations in March and then do the field trip in May.
No.
So we have to
So-
back it up.
I'm okay with moving it to May.
Yeah, we probably would be more lucky with weather as well.
Looking at this is a week away, a week and a half away.
Right, that was my concern about the March, is it's coming right up on us.
So I would
And
rather,
April it would be great if PSSA.
I'd rather go with the field trip the week of Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Because it could be any day. The only thing is, if we don't want to do Friday, because Friday could be our field day. The 31st.
Our field day is the 22nd.
See, we don't know when ours is, because our new gym teacher is just starting on Monday.
Well, we wouldn't have to pick the field trip day right now, because like I said, once Westchester's out in early May, then my schedule is way flexible. But we want to have the observations starting in early May. And then some point after that, we can make the field trip whenever.
I actually feel better about that too, just for instructional purposes. Taking my morning is a lot different in math than before PSSA.
So we're looking May 9th to start observation, and then field trip the week of May.
Is that still gonna be a breakfast food?
It'll still be a breakfast. Yeah. Ryan, do you see any problem with these dates or anything?
Okay, what dates specifically?
So we're looking at doing a whole sequence in May. We have the problem that March is like right around the corner. And
Yes.
I'm traveling in March, and then April is standardized testing month here.
Oh, okay, well, yes, that gets in the way. So I think that ideally it would have been a little bit earlier, but we got a little bit late start on this, and I think that it's okay because we're kind of piloting the whole thing and that we're going to tinker with it and make it better for next year. And then if we have a goal of having all of this done in, say, March of 2020 for the second go around, that would probably be. Allison, what do you think? Do you think that would, because next year we'll be up against the deadline for the ending of the project, and so we'll want to have adequate time to do everything. So,
Right. Yeah. I mean, for this year at least, like I think May will work for us. I mean, I don't think that, starting in another week probably gives everyone enough time, nor does it give you the time to get the other, hour-long sessions done. So it sounds like May is what it has to be.
yeah, it's not optimal, but it's okay. So
We're flexible.
yes, we are. And next year we'll have our act together a little bit quicker and do it sooner in the year. So, well, not sooner, in February or March timeframe next year, something like that. So,
I think we're flexible enough next year that, if we knew that was coming along.
Right.
Yeah, we have our schedules, we can build around it.
so yes, May. Yes, I am not muted. So May's good.
And so we'll plan on getting the student consent forms sent before that May, before May, probably in April.
And just as an aside, Spring Astronomy Day, National Astronomy Day, is May 11th. And sometimes some of the amateur communities have events for the public on those days.
And are you thinking 2 of us in the morning one day, 2 of us in the afternoon?
We can either do a morning, afternoon, back, or even back to back, or we can do one day and one the very next day. Like in May, it's way more flexible because nobody's here. I mean, what I've always found is mornings are what people prefer. But if you want to move at 10 to 11 and then we'll get from 11 to evening, afternoon, great, or however.
My town was a morning, you're in early school, right?
Yep.
Okay. So like they could pick you up and come up to respond or vice versa.
Yeah, I've found that sometimes when you get back-to-back routes, you only need one bus. They'll go pick, or 2 buses, they'll go pick up the kids, drop them off, go get the next bus load, bring them, switch, take them back, and so they just go back and forth a couple times. It doesn't take an hour to go there and back.
Right. All right.
But that's totally up to you guys.
I would say it's turn it into the National Astronomy Day too.
Yeah.
Everybody gets to step up or, feel bad.
Nice. Anything else, guys? You're in?
No, that sounds good, and that actually is nice, and so that we could have a couple of other virtual meetings. Is is kind of the consensus of the group that, we've got lots of time here. We could conceivably have everyone come in for another session like that, or do you feel like just having a couple of virtual meetings would, kind of put the finishing touches on this, I guess, for this year, and then next year we'll have some more in-person meetings to make some refinements. So what's your feeling about what your needs are as far as meeting?
Now that we have the format down.
It's all small stuff.
Yeah.
hopefully. I think so. I think it would be great, to talk with Maria and get her input on, we can even give her a copy of sort of the instructional sequence and she can speak.
Oh,
to
yeah.
it.
Yeah, we'll definitely want to have that. And that actually would be really good to, if one of you or Karen or someone could kind of consolidate that into some sort of a document that we could put into the Google Drive that kind of describes what it is that you all are planning on doing, I guess. So, and that'll give us a better sense too for when we would want to be coming into specifically into the classroom, and it would give Allison and Kristen a better sense of making any adjustments to their documents that are necessary. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I'm excited. I think that this is great. I love the conversations that all of you are having. It's so thoughtful, and we were kind of making a contrast between all of you and the four of you there in Pennsylvania have a lot more experience at being in the classroom than our four teachers here in the Bay Area. It seems like we ended up with relatively new teachers here. Plus, 3 of them are on strike right now, so it's kind of a challenge. So.
We've got some years on us.
Yeah. So thank you for all of your thoughtfulness, and I know that we appreciate that, to draw on your expertise and to build something hopefully that's going to work for the kids. That's the goal. So.
All right. Well, we're going to go off to lunch. You guys can have breakfast.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to go home and have breakfast. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, bye.
All right.